The silence in the top-floor office of the Valerius Tower was heavy, thick enough to be felt in the lungs. It was a space composed of cold marble, dark mahogany, and the scent of expensive bourbon and iron. For Elara Moon, this was her sanctuary and her prison. For 2 years, she had been the silent gear in the massive machine that was Alaric Valerius's life. She was the one who made sure his coffee was 180 degrees Fahrenheit, black as the soul of the city. She was the one who filed away disposal records under the guise of corporate restructuring. To the world, Alaric Valerius was a titan of industry. To the underworld, he was the ombra della morte, the shadow of death. Elara sat at her desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was an expert at invisibility. She wore charcoal grey suits that blended into the walls and kept her honey-brown hair pinned in a tight, severe bun. She never looked him in the eye for longer than 3 seconds. It was safer that way. To look into Alaric's eyes was to stare into a storm of smoke and steel. A place where a girl like her, soft, quiet, and ordinary, could easily drown. The intercom buzzed, a low, vibrating hum that made her heart skip a beat. "Miss Moon, my office, now." His voice was a low-frequency rumble, a sound that felt like velvet being dragged over gravel. Elara stood, smoothed her skirt, and grabbed her tablet. She took a deep breath, clutching her professional mask like armor, and pushed open the heavy oak doors. Alaric was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. He had discarded his jacket, and his white dress shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing the dark, intricate tattoos that crept down his forearms, symbols of a life lived in the trenches of power. "The Moretti shipments," he began, not turning around. "Have they been cleared through the Jersey docks?" "Not yet, sir," Elara replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "There was a discrepancy in the manifest. I've rerouted the paperwork through our shell company in Panama. It will be cleared by 4 o'clock tomorrow." Alaric turned slowly. Even after 2 years, his presence hit her like a physical weight. He was tall, built with a predatory grace, his face a masterpiece of sharp angles and cold indifference. "You anticipate the problems before I even voice them, Elara." Her heart hammered. He rarely used her first name. It was usually Miss Moon. "It's my job, Mr. Valerius." He stepped closer, the polished floor echoing under his leather shoes. He stopped just inches away, radiating a heat that made her skin prickle. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, before his fingers brushed a stray lock of hair that had escaped her bun. The touch was electric, a spark in a room full of gunpowder. "You've been with me for 2 years, he murmured, his smoke-grey eyes searching hers. "In all that time, you've never asked for a raise. You've never taken a vacation. You've seen the blood on my hands and you haven't run. Why?" Elara felt the air thin. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't tell him that she had fallen in love with a monster. She couldn't tell him that her small apartment felt like a tomb, and only here, in the gravity of his darkness, did she feel truly alive. "I am a creature of habit, sir," she whispered, "and I have nowhere else to go." His jaw tightened, a small muscle pulsing in his cheek. For a moment, the mask of the Don slipped, revealing a flicker of something raw, something hungry. But then he stepped back, the wall of ice slamming back into place. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon. I have a meeting with the commission." "Yes, sir." "Go home, Elara. You've been here since dawn. The driver is waiting downstairs." "Thank you, Mr. Valerius." Elara turned to leave, but as she reached the door, she felt his gaze burning into her back. She didn't know that tonight would be the last night of her invisible life. She didn't know that Alaric had been watching her just as closely as she had been watching him, counting the seconds until he could no longer stop himself from claiming her. She returned to her small apartment in Queens, a stark contrast to the opulence of the Valerius Tower. She ate a quiet dinner and stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked tired. Her eyes, usually a bright, soulful hazel, looked dimmed. She was 25 years old, and she was spending her youth in the service of a man who dealt in death. "You deserve more," her friend Jessica would always tell her. "You need someone normal, someone who doesn't have a body count." Jessica was the only one who knew a fraction of the truth. They had been best friends since college, and Jessica had watched Elara turn into a shell of her former self. A text message lit up her phone. It was Jessica. "Lunch tomorrow, that Italian place on 5th. No excuses, Elle. You need sunshine and a man who isn't a billionaire mobster." Elara sighed and typed back, "Fine. 1 p.m. But I have to be back by 2:30. She went to sleep that night dreaming of smoke and steel, of Alaric's hands on her waist, and the terrifying thrill of being caught in his orbit. The next day, the sun was deceptively bright. Elara met Jessica at the restaurant. It was a place of white tablecloths and clinking wine glasses, a world of normal people. Jessica had brought a surprise. Marcus, a handsome architect with a warm smile and a golden retriever energy. "Elara, this is Marcus," Jessica said with a mischievous glint in her eye. "He's been dying to meet the woman I keep telling him is the smartest person in New York." Marcus took her hand, his palm warm and safe. "It's a pleasure, Elara. Jessica says you work in high-stakes logistics?" "Something like that," Elara said, offering a forced smile. Marcus was charming. He talked about sustainable housing and the jazz clubs he liked to visit. He was everything Elara should want. He was safe. He was kind. He was light. But as she sat there, she felt a strange, cold itch at the back of her neck. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. It wasn't loud, but the sound seemed to be sucked out of the room. The waiter dropped a tray of breadsticks. The woman at the next table gasped. Elara looked toward the entrance. Alaric Valerius stood there. He looked like a god of war dropped into a garden party. He was flanked by two massive men in dark suits, his shadows, Luca and Silas. Alaric's eyes swept the room with clinical coldness until they landed on Elara. More specifically, they landed on Marcus's hand, which was still resting on Elara's. The air in the restaurant turned to ice. Alaric began to walk toward their table, his stride measured and lethal. Every eye in the room followed him. He didn't look at the diners. He didn't look at Jessica or Marcus. He looked only at Elara. "Mr. Valerius," Elara stammered, standing up so quickly her chair nearly toppled. "What are you doing here?" Alaric didn't answer. He reached the table, and for a second Marcus tried to stand up, his face pale but determined. "Excuse me, sir. We are in the middle of—" Silas, Alaric's bodyguard, placed a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder, forcing him back down. It was a silent, terrifying command. Alaric stepped into Elara's space. He was so close she could smell the expensive tobacco and the cold wind of the city on his skin. He reached out, his hand sliding behind her neck, his thumb tilting her chin up. "I told you to clear your schedule for me, Elara," he whispered, his voice vibrating through her entire body. I did. I was going to be back by—" "You're not going back," he cut her off. And then he did the unthinkable. In the middle of the crowded restaurant, in front of the socialites, the paparazzi, and his enemies who were undoubtedly watching, Alaric Valerius pulled his secretary into his arms and kissed her. It was a violent, desperate claim. It wasn't a request for affection. It was a declaration of war. His lips were hard against hers, demanding and possessive. Elara's heart stopped, then exploded into a frantic rhythm. She could hear the gasps around them, the frantic clicking of a phone camera, but all she could feel was him. When he finally pulled back, he didn't release her. He kept his hand anchored on the back of her head. He turned his gaze to Marcus, then to the entire room. "She is mine," Alaric said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the restaurant. "Let it be known, Elara Moon is under the protection of the Valerius name. Anyone who looks at her, anyone who touches her, answers to me." He looked back at Elara, his eyes burning with a dark, terrifying triumph. "Let's go home, Elara. The world is watching, and the wolves are already hungry." As he led her out of the restaurant, his hand firm on her waist, Elara felt the weight of 1,000 targets on her back. The ghost in the office was gone. The moon had been claimed by the shadow, and for the first time in her life, Elara Moon was truly, dangerously visible. The interior of the Black Maybach was an oasis of silence, but for Elara, it felt like the pressurized cabin of a jet plummeting toward the earth. The scent of Alaric's cologne, sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and a hint of something metallic filled the confined space. He hadn't released her hand since they left the restaurant. His grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute, a shackle of warm skin and bone that reminded her she was no longer a free agent. Outside, the city of Manhattan blurred into a smear of grey and neon. Elara stared out the window, her heart still hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her lips felt swollen, still tingling from a kiss that had effectively ended her life as she knew it. "You're trembling," Alaric said. It wasn't a question. He didn't turn to look at her. He remained staring straight ahead, the sharp profile of his jaw looking as though it were carved from volcanic rock. "You just declared war on my behalf, Alaric," Elara whispered, her voice cracking. She didn't use Mr. Valerius. The professional veil had been shredded the moment his tongue had tasted hers. "Marcus, Jessica, they're innocent. You terrified them. You humiliated me." Alaric finally turned his head. The grey in his eyes was no longer cold. It was burning with a dark, possessive fire. "I saved you. Marcus was a mistake, a soft man for a woman who belongs in the dark. As for humiliation..." He leaned closer, his shadow engulfing her. "They didn't see a woman humiliated. They saw a woman who is untouchable. They saw the only thing in this world that Alaric Valerius would bleed for." "I am a secretary," she cried out, finally turning to face him. "I am a girl from Queens with a college debt and a small apartment. I don't belong in your world of blood oaths and territory." "You've lived in it for 2 years, Elara. You've just been sitting in the foyer," he replied coolly. "Today, I pulled you into the throne room. There is no going back." The car slowed as it entered the private, high-security garage of the Valerius Tower. Luca, the driver and Alaric's most trusted enforcer, stepped out to open the door. As Elara emerged, she noticed 4 more black SUVs idling in the shadows. Men with bulges under their jackets stood at every exit. "Where are we going?" she asked, as Alaric led her toward the private express elevator. "To the penthouse, my personal quarters," he said. "My things, my apartment." "Luca's team has already cleared your apartment," Alaric said as the elevator doors hissed shut. The light inside was dim, gold-toned. "Anything of value is being moved. The rest will be burned. That apartment no longer exists. Elara Moon no longer lives in Queens." The finality of his words hit her like a physical blow. She felt a sudden, sharp spike of claustrophobia. "You can't do that! You can't just erase my life." I am protecting your life." Alaric's voice dropped to a low, dangerous octave. He stepped forward, pinning her against the mirrored wall of the elevator. His hands slammed against the glass on either side of her head. "Do you think Moretti cares about your lease? By now, every hitman from here to New Jersey has seen the photo of us in that restaurant. If you went back to that apartment, you wouldn't last the hour. They would take you, Elara. They would use you to break me, and they would enjoy every second of it." His eyes searched hers, desperate and fierce. "I will not let that happen. You are staying with me, under my breath, under my skin." The elevator dinged, and the doors opened to the Valerius penthouse. It was a masterpiece of minimalist luxury. Stone floors, vaulted ceilings, and a view of the skyline that made the gods seem like neighbors. But to Elara, it looked like a gilded cage. He led her to a sprawling suite at the end of the hall. "This is yours. Everything you need is inside. Clothes, jewelry, technology. If there is something missing, tell Silas." "I don't want jewelry, Alaric. I want my freedom," she said, her voice small. Alaric stopped at the door, his back to her. His shoulders were broad, a mountain of tension beneath his silk shirt. "In this world, Elara, freedom is a fairy tale. There is only power and those who serve it. I choose to be the power, and I choose you to be at my side." He left her then, the heavy door clicking shut with a sound that felt like a gavel striking. Elara collapsed onto the massive bed. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, cool and crisp, but they felt like silk spiderwebs. She walked to the window. The world below looked like a toy set. She saw the tiny lights of cars and wondered which one belonged to Jessica. Was her friend okay? Was Marcus terrified? She went to the vanity. There she saw a row of velvet boxes. She opened one. Inside was a necklace of black diamonds, glittering like frozen tears. Beside it lay a new phone. She picked it up. There were no contacts, no photos. Only one number was saved: Alaric. She sat there for hours as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the New York skyline in shades of bruised purple and violent orange. A soft knock at the door startled her. It was Silas, the silent giant who served as Alaric's right hand. He carried a silver tray with a glass of wine and a plate of delicately prepared sea bass. "The Don expects you in the library in 1 hour, Miss Moon," he said, his voice a monotonous rumble. "And if I refuse—" Silas paused, his dark eyes showing a flicker of pity. "He is not a man who accepts refusal well, especially not today. Please, Miss Moon, wear the blue dress in the wardrobe. It was his mother's favorite color." After Silas left, Elara opened the massive walk-in wardrobe. It was a sea of silk, lace, and fur. She found the blue dress, a floor-length gown of midnight navy silk with a plunging back and a modest neckline. It was beautiful, elegant, and looked like something a queen would wear to a funeral. She dressed with trembling fingers. She left her hair down, the honey-colored waves cascading over her shoulders. She didn't put on the diamonds. She wanted Alaric to know that while he could clothe her, he could not buy her. She found the library on the lower level of the penthouse. It was a 2-story room filled with thousands of leather-bound books, smelling of old paper and wood smoke. Alaric was sitting in a high-backed leather chair by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had changed into a charcoal smoking jacket. He looked up as she entered, and for a fleeting second the predatory mask faltered. He looked at her as if she were a miracle he didn't deserve. "You look exquisite," he breathed. "I feel like a trophy," she countered, walking to the center of the room. "Is that what this is, Alaric? Did you get bored of the boardroom and decide to kidnap a human being?" Alaric stood and walked toward her. He didn't stop until he was in her personal space. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her collarbone. Elara shivered, her body betraying her mind's resolve. You were never a trophy, Elara. You were a secret. I've watched you for 730 days. I've watched you handle men twice your size with nothing but a sharp word and a cold look. I've watched you protect my interests better than my own blood. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I've wanted to do what I did today since the hour you walked into my office. I just waited until I had no other choice. Why now? She asked, her breath hitching. Because Victor Moretti found out. My mole in his camp told me Victor was planning to snatch you this afternoon. He saw the way I looked at you when you weren't looking. He knew you were my heart before I was willing to admit it to myself. Elara's eyes widened. He was going to kill me? No. Alaric's grip on her arm tightened, his knuckles white. He was going to keep you. He was going to use you to make me sign over the Jersey docks. I couldn't let that happen. So I did the only thing that would stop him. I made you a Valerius. Publicly. Irrevocably. But I'm not a Valerius, she whispered. Alaric reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a heavy gold band with a crest, a wolf circling a crescent moon, encrusted with rubies. This is the signet of my family, he said. The women of my line have worn this for 4 generations. It means you are under my law. It means my men will die for you. It means my enemies will fear you. He took her left hand. His touch was firm. Tonight, we sign the papers. Tomorrow, the world learns that Elara Moon is the future Mrs. Valerius. And if I don't want to marry a monster? She asked, tears blurring her vision. Alaric leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm, smelling of high-end scotch. Then you will marry a protector, because the monster is the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave, Elara. Choose the monster, I promise. The monster will adore you. Elara looked at the ring, then at the man whose hands were stained with the blood of the city. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, the desperate, terrifying need for her to stay. She was a girl who loved the light, but she realized that the light had already abandoned her. Sign the papers, she whispered. Alaric closed his eyes, a shudder of relief passing through him. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft, lingering, and far more frightening than the kiss in the restaurant, because this one held a promise of forever. The cage was locked. The key was thrown away. And as the moon rose over New York, Elara Moon began her first night as the Shadow's bride. The morning in the Valerius penthouse arrived not with the cheerful chirp of a Brooklyn sparrow, but with the cold, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Elara woke up in a bed that felt like an island of silk in a sea of shadow. The ring, the gold band with the wolf and the crescent moon, felt heavy on her finger, a physical anchor connecting her to a man she had served for years, but was only now beginning to truly see. She sat up, pushing the honey-coloured waves of her hair back from her face. Yesterday she was a ghost in a grey suit. Today she was the bride of the most feared man in New York. A soft chime came from the bedside table. A sleek, black tablet sat there with a single message glowing on the screen. Breakfast at 8:30. The conservatory. Be ready. There was no please. There was no if you're feeling up to it. Alaric Valerius did not ask. He dictated the rhythm of the world. Elara bathed in a tub of black marble, the water smelling of jasmine and expensive oils. She felt like a sacrificial lamb being prepared for an altar. In the walk-in closet, she found a dress that had been laid out for her. It was a cream-coloured sheath dress, conservative, yet cut with such precision that it felt like a second skin. Beside it was a pair of nude stilettos and a pearl necklace that looked like frozen drops of moonlight. She dressed with a robotic efficiency. If she was to be his queen, she would wear the armor he provided. The conservatory was a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants that looked like they belonged in a rainforest rather than a skyscraper. Alaric was already there, seated at a small wrought-iron table. He was reading a physical newspaper, a rare habit in a digital age, and drinking black coffee. He looked impeccable in a three-piece suit of charcoal wool, his dark hair swept back, every inch the corporate predator. As Elara entered, he stood. It was a gesture of old-world chivalry that felt jarringly out of place in a house built on blood money. "You slept late," he observed, pulling out her chair. "Captivity is exhausting," Elara replied, her voice cool. Alaric didn't flinch. He resumed his seat and signaled to a waiter, a silent man Elara hadn't noticed standing in the shadows. Within seconds, a plate of smoked salmon, poached eggs and fresh fruit was placed before her. "Eat," Alaric commanded softly. "You have a long day ahead of you. The lawyers will be here at 10, the tailor at noon, and tonight we have guests." Ilara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Guests? I'm not ready to see anyone, Alaric. Not after what happened at the restaurant." "The restaurant was the announcement," Alaric said, his grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Tonight is the confirmation. The heads of the 5 families are coming. They want to see the woman who managed to tame the shadow. They want to see if you are a weakness they can exploit or a strength they should fear." "I am neither," Elara whispered. "I am just a woman who wants to go home." "This is your home," Alaric said, his tone turning sharp. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The heat of his skin was a stark contrast to the cold glass of the table. "Look at me, Elara." She hesitated, then lifted her gaze. "You were a ghost because I allowed you to be. But the moment Victor Moretti set his sights on you, the ghost died. If you walk out of that door without my name, you are a corpse. Within these walls and with that ring on your finger, you are a goddess. You will sit at the head of that table tonight, and you will show them that you belong there. And if I fail? You won't. I've watched you negotiate billion-dollar mergers without blinking. These men are just businessmen with bloodier ledgers. Handle them as you handled the Carlyle Group." He squeezed her hand, a gesture that felt almost like a plea wrapped in a command, then stood up. "Finish your breakfast. I have calls to make." The rest of the morning was a blur of high-stakes domesticity. A team of lawyers arrived with a stack of documents so thick it could have served as a doorstop. Elara sat in the library, her eyes scanning the legal jargon with the practiced ease of a career secretary. Prenuptial agreements, trust funds, life insurance policies, and non-disclosure agreements. But there was one document that caught her eye. It was a deed to a house in the south of France, held in her name only. "What is this?" she asked the lead lawyer, a silver-haired man who looked like he'd spent his life defending the devil. "The don't instructions were clear, Mrs. Valerius," the lawyer replied. "In the event of his untimely departure, you are to be provided with an immediate exit strategy, a new identity, a secure location, and enough liquid assets to live 3 lifetimes in luxury." Ilara's heart skipped. Alaric was already planning for his death and her survival. By noon, the tailor arrived. She was a diminutive woman with a measuring tape draped around her neck like a snake. She brought bolts of silk, lace, and velvet that cost more than Ilara's college tuition. "The Don requested red," the tailor chirped, her fingers flying over Ilara's waist. "A power colour, something that says fire in a house of stone." "No," Elara said firmly, surprising herself. "I want silver, something that reflects the light. but stays cool. The tailor looked nervous, glancing at the security guards by the door, but Alaric had entered the room, leaning against the doorframe with a faint, enigmatic smile. "Silver it is," he said. "Listen to her. She's the one wearing the crown." The afternoon turned into a grueling lesson in mafia etiquette. Alaric sat with her, showing her photos of the men who would be coming to dinner. Don Moretti, Victor's father, old school, thinks women are for breeding and cooking. Don't let him talk down to you. Don Russo, controls the unions, greedy, will try to buy your favor with jewelry. And Don Chen, the most dangerous of the bunch because he's the smartest. He won't look at your dress. He'll look at your eyes to see if you're lying. Elara absorbed it all. Her mind, sharpened by years of managing Alaric's complicated life, began to map out the night like a battlefield. As evening fell, the penthouse transformed. The lights were dimmed, replaced by the warm, amber glow of hundreds of candles. A catering team moved like ghosts through the dining room, setting a table of obsidian and gold. Elara stood in front of the mirror in her suite. The silver dress was a masterpiece. It clung to her curves like liquid moonlight, a floor-length gown with a high neck and long sleeves, but a back that was cut dangerously low. She looked ethereal, yet untouchable. Alaric appeared behind her. He wore a tuxedo that made him look like a dark prince. He held a velvet box in his hand. Inside was a necklace of emeralds, stones the color of a poisonous jungle surrounded by diamonds. "For courage," he said, fastening it around her neck. His fingers were cool against her skin, but his breath was hot against her ear. "You look like a vision, Elara. Try not to blind them." "I'm terrified, Alaric," she admitted, her reflection looking like a stranger. He turned her around, his hands resting on her shoulders. "Good. Fear is a compass. It tells you where the danger is. Use it." The doorbell rang, a low, melodic chime that signaled the arrival of the wolves. The dinner was a masterclass in tension. The four dons sat around the table, their shadows looming large against the glass walls. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the unspoken threat of violence. Don Moretti, a man who looked like a withered grape in a $1,000 suit, leaned forward, his eyes raking over Elara. "So, this is the girl. A secretary? Alaric, I thought you had better taste than to bring a commoner to the high table." The room went silent. Alaric's grip on his wineglass tightened until his knuckles turned white. But before he could speak, Elara set her fork down with a deliberate, soft click. "A commoner who has managed Mr. Valerius's offshore accounts for 2 years, Don Moretti," Elara said, her voice steady and clear. "Which means I know exactly how much your family owes the Valerius organization in shipping delays from the last quarter. Would you like me to recite the figures, or shall we continue with the soup?" Don Russo choked on his wine. Don Chen's eyes lit up with a flash of genuine amusement. Alaric's hand under the table found Elara's thigh, his thumb stroking her skin in a silent, thunderous applause. Moretti's face turned a violent shade of red. "She has a tongue, this one." "She has a mind," Alaric corrected, his voice like a low growl. "And she is my wife. You will address her with the respect her position demands, or you will leave my house in a bag." The rest of the dinner was a blur of coded threats and strategic alliances. Elara played her part to perfection. She was the calm at the center of Alaric's storm. She spoke only when necessary, and when she did, it was with a lethal precision that left the dons reeling. When the last guest finally departed, Elara felt like she had run a marathon. She stood on the balcony, the cold New York air biting at her bare back. Alaric stepped out beside her. He draped his tuxedo jacket over her shoulders. You were magnificent, he whispered. Moretti is humiliated. Chen is impressed. You didn't just survive, Elara. You conquered. Is it always going to be like this? She asked, looking out at the city she no longer recognized. A life of dinner parties and death threats. Alaric turned her toward him. The candlelight from the room reflected in his grey eyes, making them look like molten silver. I am trying to change it, Elara. I am trying to pull the Valerius name out of the mud. But until then, I need you. I need your mind. I need your light. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. It was a soft kiss, a stark contrast to the possessive claim in the restaurant. This was a kiss of gratitude, of partnership. Go to bed, he murmured. Tomorrow we start the transition. I'm moving the legitimate assets to your name. You're going to be the CEO of Valerius Holdings. You're giving me the company? I'm giving you the power to keep us safe. As Elara walked back into the penthouse, she realized she was no longer a secretary. She was no longer a ghost. She was the heart of an empire. And for the first time, she felt the cold, intoxicating thrill of the weight of the crown. The days following the dinner with the 5 families felt like a descent into a dream that was both beautiful and terrifying. Elara was no longer living in New York. She was living in the Valerius version of it. In this world, traffic parted for their motorcade. Restaurants closed their doors to the public so she could dine in peace. And every person she met bowed their head as if she were royalty. But the danger was growing. The news was filled with reports of gangland unrest in New Jersey and the Bronx, code for the Moretti family lashing out after their humiliation at the dinner. Victor Moretti was a wounded animal, and wounded animals were the most prone to biting. We can't wait for a grand ceremony, Alaric said one evening. They were in his private study, the room lit only by the amber glow of the fireplace. The rumors are spreading that our union is just a tactical play. I need the bond to be legal and spiritual. I need you to be a Valerius by law tonight. Elara looked up from a spreadsheet of the new holding company. Tonight, Alaric, it's 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. Death doesn't keep a calendar, Elara, he replied, walking over to her. He took the tablet from her hands and pulled her to her feet. I've arranged for a judge who owes me his seat to come to the penthouse. Luca and Silas will be our witnesses. It will be quiet, private, and absolute. Elara felt a lump form in her throat. She had always imagined a wedding with flowers, her parents watching from the front row, and a sense of joy. Instead, she was getting a midnight contract in a house of shadows. I don't even have a dress, she whispered. Alaric's expression softened, a rare look of genuine tenderness crossing his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned key. Follow me. He led her to a room at the very end of the penthouse hall, a room that had remained locked since she arrived. He turned the key and the heavy door groaned open. Inside was a walk-in cedar closet, perfectly preserved. This was my mother's, Alaric said, his voice hushed. He walked to a garment bag and unzipped it. Inside was a vintage gown of ivory lace and silk, timeless and elegant. She wore this when she married my father. She was the only thing in his life that wasn't stained by the business. She was his light, much like you are mine. Elara touched the delicate lace. It was soft, smelling faintly of lavender and a bygone era. Alaric, this is too much. I can't. You can, he insisted, turning her to face him. I want you to wear it. Not because of tradition, but because I want the world to know that I am giving you the best of my history, not just the worst of my present. 40 minutes later, Elara stood in the center of the grand living room. The ivory dress fit her as if it had been woven for her body. The lace sleeves hugged her arms, and the silk skirt pooled at her feet like a cloud. She wore no makeup, and her hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Alaric stood by the window, waiting. When he turned and saw her, he stopped breathing. For a man who had seen everything the world had to offer, he looked utterly stunned. He wore a simple black suit, but he looked more imposing than ever. The judge, a nervous man in a black robe, stood behind a small marble pedestal. Luca and Silas stood by the doors, their usual stone-faced expressions replaced by a look of grim respect. "We are gathered here," the judge began, his voice trembling slightly, "to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was short. There was no music, no flower girls, no cheering crowd. There was only the sound of the wind whipping against the glass walls and the crackle of the fire. When it came time for the vows, Alaric took Elara's hands in his. His grip was steady, grounding her. "I, Alaric Valerius," he began, his voice deep and resonant, "take you, Elara Moon, to be my wife. I offer you my name, my protection, and my life. I vow to stand between you and the darkness, to be your shield when the world is cruel, and to adore you when the world is cold. Everything I own is yours. Every breath I take is for your safety. From this night until my last, you are my queen." Elara looked into his grey eyes and saw a man who was offering her his soul, a soul he thought was beyond saving. She realized in that moment that she didn't just love the idea of him. She loved the man himself, with all his jagged edges and terrible secrets. "I, Elara Moon," she whispered, her voice gaining strength, "take you, Alaric Valerius, to be my husband. I offer you my heart, my loyalty, and my light. I vow to stand by your side, to see the man behind the shadow, and to be the home you've never had. I am yours in this life and whatever comes after." "The rings," the judge prompted. Alaric slid the family signet ring onto her finger, and Elara placed a matching gold band on his. "By the power vested in me," the judge said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Alaric didn't hesitate. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It wasn't the possessive, public kiss from the restaurant, nor the tactical kiss from the library. This was a kiss of surrender. It was the seal on a blood vow. "Mrs. Valerius," he murmured against her lips. "Mr. Valerius," she replied. The judge and the witnesses retreated into the shadows, leaving them alone in the vast, moonlit room. Alaric led her to the balcony. The city below was a carpet of diamonds, but for the first time, Elara didn't feel like a prisoner looking out at the world. She felt like a co-ruler. "Are you happy, Elara?" he asked, looking out at the skyline. I'm at peace," she said. "And for now, that's better than happy." He turned to her, his expression turning serious. "The transition of the assets begins tomorrow. You will be the official head of the Valerius Foundation and the CEO of the new shipping conglomerate. You will have more power on paper than I do." "You're really doing it," she said, amazed. "You're trying to go legitimate." "I have to," he said, his eyes darkening, "because I want our children to have a name that doesn't require a bodyguard to carry. I want a life where I can take you to a restaurant and not have to scan the room for assassins." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "But the Morettis won't make it easy. They see my move toward legitimacy as a sign of weakness. They think I'm getting soft because of you." "Are you?" she teased gently. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "I am softer for you, Elara. But for them, I am more dangerous than ever. Because now I have something to lose, and I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let them touch a single hair on your head." The night should have been a celebration, but in the distance the faint sound of a siren echoed through the streets. It was a reminder that the war was not over. It was only entering a new, more deadly phase. They spent the rest of the night in the master suite, a room Elara had never entered until now. It was a place of dark silks and soft candlelight. There, in the quiet of the early morning hours, the monster and the ghost became one. There were no secrets in the dark, only the heat of their bodies and the whispered promises of a future they both hoped to reach. As Elara lay in Alaric's arms, watching the sun begin to bleed over the horizon, she looked at the ring on her finger. She was no longer a girl from Queens. She was a Valerius. She was the moon that reflected the shadow's light. And as the first light of dawn hit the glass walls, a phone on the nightstand buzzed. Alaric reached for it, his face hardening instantly as he read the message. "What is it?" Elara asked, a cold dread settling in her chest. Alaric sat up, the sheets falling away to reveal the tattoos on his back, the marks of his violent past. "Victor Moretti has made a move," Alaric said, his voice like ice. "He's attacked one of our legitimate warehouses in Jersey, and he's left a message." "What message?" Alaric looked at her, his eyes filled with a terrifying, protective fury. "He says he's coming for the bride. He wants to see if the ivory dress stays white when it's soaked in Valerius blood." Elara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply sat up and reached for her robe. "Then let's show him," she said, her voice sounding like Alaric's, cold, sharp, and utterly determined. "Let's show him what happens when you threaten a Valerius." The honeymoon was over. The war had truly begun. The dawn of Elara's first day as a Valerius did not bring the warmth of a new beginning, but rather the cold, sterile light of a war room. The master suite, once a sanctuary of whispered vows, was now flooded with the harsh glow of computer monitors and the low, urgent murmurs of security teams. Alaric stood by the window, his tuxedo shirt discarded for a tactical black sweater, his eyes fixed on a digital map of the Jersey docks. The message from Victor Moretti, the threat to stain her ivory dress with blood, was no longer just words. It was an act of aggression. "The Jersey warehouse is a total loss," Luca reported, his voice tight. "They didn't just steal the inventory, Alaric. They burned it, and they left the night watchman alive just long enough to repeat Victor's message." Elara sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a dark silk robe that felt too thin for the sudden chill in the room. The transition from secretary to target had happened in the span of a heartbeat. She looked at the gold ring on her finger, the wolf and the moon glinting under the recessed lights. "He's testing the perimeter," Alaric said, turning from the window. His face was a mask of granite. "He knows I'm moving assets into Elara's name. He wants to prove that her name is a liability, not a shield." "Alaric," Elara said, her voice small but steady. "What happens now?" He crossed the room in 3 long strides, kneeling before her. He took her hands in his, and for a second the ruthless Don vanished, replaced by a man terrified of losing the only light he had ever found. "Now, the world shrinks," he said. "You don't leave this penthouse. Not for a walk, not for a breath of air. The elevators are locked. The stairwells are rigged with sensors. Luca and Silas will be at your door 24 hours a day." "A gilded cage," she whispered. "A fortress," he corrected. "Victor is desperate. He's lost the respect of the other families, and he thinks that by striking at you, he can claw back his reputation. I won't let him use you to build his throne." The door to the suite opened and Silas entered, carrying a secure laptop. "Don Moretti is on the line. The father. He wants to speak with you." Alaric took the laptop, his jaw tightening. He sat beside Elara, keeping his arm firmly around her waist. The screen flickered to life, revealing the weathered, ancient face of the Moretti patriarch. Alaric, the old man wheezed, his voice sounding like dry leaves. I hear your new bride has caused quite a stir. My son is impulsive. He feels the sting of your recent business moves. Your son is a dead man walking if he mentions my wife's name again, Alaric replied, his voice a low, terrifying vibration. Violence is so loud, Alaric, Moretti countered. I am calling to offer a truce. Give us the Jersey docks back, and I will ensure Victor stays in his cage. If not, well, even the thickest glass can be shattered. Alaric didn't hesitate. He reached out and slammed the laptop shut, severing the connection. They're offering a truce? Elara asked. They're offering a distraction, Alaric said. They want me to think they're negotiating while they move their pieces. Silas, double the guard at the Foundation office. They might try to strike there to lure us out. The rest of the morning was a masterclass in high-stakes paranoia. Elara watched as Alaric coordinated his empire with a lethal efficiency. He wasn't just a mobster, he was a general. He moved men like chess pieces, securing borders and cutting off Moretti's supply lines. But by noon, a new kind of threat arrived, one that didn't come with guns or fire. Silas entered the room looking uncharacteristically pale. He was holding a small, elegant box wrapped in white ribbon. This was delivered to the lobby, scanned for explosives and toxins. It's clean, but you should see this. Alaric opened the box. Inside was a single, withered white rose, its petals stained with a dark, dried substance that Elara knew instinctively was blood. Tucked into the petals was a small, handwritten note on expensive stationery. A wedding gift for Elara Moon. Or should I say, Elara Valerius. The moon is beautiful tonight. It would be a shame to see it eclipsed. Elara felt a wave of nausea. He was at the lobby? Victor was in this building? No, Alaric growled, his eyes turning a dangerous shade of silver. He hired a courier. It's a taunt. He's showing me that my walls aren't as high as I think they are. He turned to Silas. Every guard on the lobby shift is to be interrogated. Now, and I want Victor's head on a plate by sundown. Alaric, stop, Elara said, standing up. This is exactly what he wants. He wants you angry. He wants you making mistakes. He's trying to provoke the monster you told me about. Alaric turned to her, his chest heaving with suppressed rage. He threatened you in my own home, Elara. He sent blood into our sanctuary. I know, she said, stepping into his space and placing her hands on his chest. But I spent 2 years managing your life. I know how you win. You win by being smarter, not just louder. If you go on a rampage now, the other families will see it as a sign that I've made you unstable. They'll turn on us. Alaric looked down at her, his eyes searching hers. Slowly, the tension began to bleed out of his shoulders. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. You're right. You're always right. That's why I need you. Then let's play his game, Elara whispered. He wants to strike at the Foundation. Let him try. We'll leak that I'm going there tonight for a gala. We'll set a trap. No, Alaric said instantly. I am not using you as bait. I won't be there, she said. We'll use a decoy. Luca can arrange it. We draw him out, we capture his lieutenants, and we show the 5 families that the Valerius organization doesn't flinch. Alaric was silent for a long time. The idea of putting even a shadow of her in danger clearly pained him, but the strategist in him knew she was right. Silas, Alaric said, not taking his eyes off Elara. Prepare the decoy. We leak the schedule to the Moretti mole and tell the teams, no one kills Victor. I want him alive. I want to show him exactly what happens to men who send withered roses to my wife. As the sun began to set, the penthouse felt like the command center of a submarine. Elara sat at the mahogany desk, her fingers flying over a secure laptop, monitoring the digital chatter of the Moretti loyalists. She was no longer just a secretary. She was the brain of the operation. The decoy is in the car, Luca reported over the comms. We're approaching the Foundation building. We have 3 tails. Moretti's men. Hold your fire until they commit, Alaric commanded. He was sitting in a leather chair, a glass of scotch in one hand and a suppressed pistol in the other. He looked at Elara, a strange mix of pride and agony in his gaze. You're too good at this, Elara. It terrifies me. I learned from the best, she said, her eyes never leaving the screen. Suddenly the screen flared red. Alaric, they're not at the Foundation. Luca, pull back. It's a diversion. What? Alaric stood up, his posture instantly lethal. They didn't go for the Foundation, Elara said, her voice trembling as she read the live data. They went for the backup servers. Alaric, they're trying to erase the transition documents. They're trying to take the legitimate assets before they're finalized. The servers are in the sub-basement of this building, Alaric realized, his face turning ghostly pale. A loud, thundering boom echoed from deep below the penthouse, shaking the floor. The lights flickered and died, leaving the room plunged into the red glow of the emergency backups. They're inside, Silas yelled, drawing his weapon. Alaric didn't hesitate. He grabbed Elara, pulling her behind the reinforced oak desk. Luca, abort! They're in the tower, sub-basement level 4. I'm coming up! Luca's voice crackled through the static. The sound of gunfire erupted from the hallway, distant at first, then closer. The Morettis weren't just attacking, they were invading. Alaric checked his weapon, then looked at Elara. The cold, calculating Don was gone. In his eyes was the raw, unadulterated fear of a man whose heart was finally exposed. Stay under the desk, he commanded, his voice a ragged whisper. No matter what you hear, no matter who calls your name, do not come out until I say the words, "The moon is full." Do you understand? Alaric, please, promise me. I promise, she whispered, her eyes blurring with tears. He kissed her then. A hard, desperate kiss that tasted of salt and iron. Then he stood, turning toward the door as it was kicked open. The hallway was a chaos of smoke and muzzle flashes. Elara curled into a ball under the desk, clutching the ring on her finger. She heard Alaric's voice, not the velvet rumble she loved, but the roar of the monster. She heard the wet thud of bodies hitting the marble, the shatter of glass, and the terrifying silence that followed each round of fire. Minutes felt like hours. The air grew thick with the smell of gunpowder. Finally, the gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. Elara held her breath, her heart drumming against her ribs so hard it was painful. She heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. "Elara!" a voice called out. It wasn't Alaric, it was Victor Moretti. "Come out, little secretary. Alaric is a bit occupied. Let's see that ivory dress." Elara squeezed her eyes shut, her knuckles white. "Don't move. Don't breathe." "He really does love you," Victor's voice continued, closer now. She could hear the clink of his shoes on the glass shards. "He stayed in the doorway to hold us off. Quite the hero. Pity he ran out of bullets." Elara's breath hitched. "No. No, Alaric." "Come on, Elara. If you come out now, I might make it quick. If I have to find you—" The desk was kicked aside. Elara looked up, her vision tunneling. Victor Moretti stood over her, a smear of blood across his cheek and a jagged smile on his face. He leveled his gun at her head. "Found you." "The moon!" A voice gasped from the doorway. Victor spun around, but he was too slow. Alaric was leaning against the doorframe, his shoulder soaked in blood, his face a mask of red and white fury. He had no gun. He had only a jagged shard of glass from the shattered bookshelf. "The moon is full!" Alaric rasped. In a blur of motion, Alaric lunged. Victor fired, the bullet grazing Alaric's side, but it didn't stop him. Alaric slammed into Victor, the sheer force of his rage pinning the younger man against the floor-to-ceiling window. "You touched my home," Alaric hissed, his hand around Victor's throat. "You threatened my wife." "Go to hell," Victor choked out. "I'm already there," Alaric replied. With a sickening crack, the window, already weakened by the explosion, shattered. For a terrifying second, Alaric and Victor teetered on the edge of the 60-story drop. Alaric shoved Victor backward into the void. Elara screamed as she watched Victor fall, a silent shadow disappearing into the New York night. Alaric collapsed onto the ledge, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Elara scrambled out from under the desk, rushing to him. She pulled him back from the jagged edge of the broken glass, holding him against her as if she could fuse their bodies together. "Alaric! Alaric, look at me!" He blinked, his grey eyes slowly focusing on her. He reached up, his blood-stained hand trembling as he touched her cheek. "Is the dress still white?" he whispered. Elara looked down. Her dark robe was stained with his blood, but she didn't care. "It doesn't matter. You're alive. You're here." The aftermath of the attack on Valerius Tower was not a time for mourning, but for a terrifying consolidation of power. The shattered glass had been replaced within hours, the blood scrubbed from the marble floors by silent crews who were paid in amounts that ensured their eternal amnesia. Alaric had survived, though his body was a map of new scars. 2 bullet wounds and a shoulder mangled by glass had forced him into a brief, restless convalescence. But while his body was mending, his mind was sharper than ever. The death of Victor Moretti had sent a shockwave through the underworld. The Shadow was no longer just a figure of myth. He was a man who had proven he would invite a war into his own living room to protect what was his. "You're staring again," Alaric said, his voice pulling Elara back to the present. They were in the conservatory. Alaric was sitting in an armchair, his chest wrapped in bandages under a black silk robe. Elara was standing by the window, watching the city. She felt different. The girl who used to worry about late-night filing was gone. In her place was a woman who had watched a man fall 60 stories to his death and hadn't looked away. "I'm thinking about the gala," Elara said, turning to him. "The debutante ball," Alaric corrected with a grim smile. "Every year the elite and the depraved gather to pretend they aren't monsters. This year it's hosted by the Moretti patriarch, a funeral disguised as a party." "He wants to see us," Elara said. "He wants to see if we're broken." Alaric stood up slowly, a hiss of pain escaping his teeth. He crossed the room and placed his hands on her waist. "He wants to see you. He thinks that because Victor is dead, I will be erratic. He thinks you are the leash that has made me weak. We are going to show him that you aren't the leash. You're the reason I've sharpened my teeth." The night of the gala arrived with a heavy, humid heat. The Moretti estate on Long Island was a sprawling fortress of gilded gates and manicured lawns. As the Valerius motorcade pulled up, the paparazzi and the sentries alike fell into a hushed silence. The door to the lead car opened, and Alaric stepped out. He looked lethal in a midnight black tuxedo, his hand extended to the woman inside. Elara emerged, and the collective breath of the crowd hitched. She wore a gown that Alaric's tailor had finished just hours before. It was a debutante dress, but not in the traditional sense. It was made of silk so dark it appeared like a pool of ink, encrusted with thousands of onyx crystals that caught the light like the eyes of a predator. Around her neck was the Valerius emerald, glowing like a poisonous heart. She wasn't a girl being introduced to society. She was a queen being introduced to her subjects. Head high, Alaric whispered as they walked up the marble steps. "You are the most dangerous thing in this room." The ballroom was a sea of masks, champagne, and whispered treachery. As they entered, the music didn't stop, but the tone shifted. The heads of the 5 families were all there, watching from their respective corners. Don Moretti, the patriarch, sat in a high-backed chair at the end of the room. He looked older, his skin like parchment, his eyes clouded with a grief that had turned into a toxic, stagnant rage. "Don Valerius," the old man wheezed as they approached, "and the moon." "Don Moretti," Alaric replied, his voice a cool, steady rumble. "My condolences on your loss. Victor was ambitious." "Ambitious men often find the ground sooner than they expected," Moretti countered, his gaze fixed on Elara. "And you, my dear, you look quite comfortable in the jewelry of a murderer." Elara didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her silk skirt whispering against the floor. "I am comfortable in the jewelry of my husband, Don Moretti. And as for murder, in this room, isn't that just another word for business?" A low murmur of shock went through the nearby guests. No woman had ever spoken to the Moretti patriarch like that. Alaric's hand settled on the small of her back, a silent sign of his lethal approval. "We didn't come to discuss semantics, Moretti. We came to ensure there is no confusion. The Jersey docks, the shipping routes, and the Valerius Tower, they are under my wife's authority now. An attack on them is no longer a dispute between families. It is a personal insult to her." Moretti leaned forward, his hands trembling on his cane. "You give a woman the keys to the kingdom and expect us to bow? You've gone soft, Alaric. You've traded your spine for a pretty face." "I've traded a reckless war for a calculated peace," Alaric said, his eyes turning into shards of ice. "But if you prefer the war, I am happy to remind you why my father named me the Shadow." The tension was broken by the sound of a violin. It was time for the first dance. In the traditions of the 5 families, the host and the most powerful guest would lead. "May I?" Alaric asked Elara, ignoring the old man. They moved to the center of the ballroom. As the music began, Alaric pulled her closer than was strictly polite. They moved with a predatory grace, a black-on-black silhouette against the gilded room. "You're doing perfectly," Alaric murmured into her ear. "Moretti is losing his grip. He's trying to provoke me, but he's terrified of you." "Why of me?" Elara asked, her hand resting on his shoulder, feeling the hard muscle beneath the wool. "Because he doesn't understand you," Alaric said. "He understands greed. He understands revenge. But he doesn't understand a woman who could have run and chose to stay. You're the variable he can't calculate." Suddenly, the music turned discordant. A man Elara recognized as a Moretti lieutenant approached the edge of the dance floor, his face frantic. He whispered something into the patriarch's ear. Moretti's face turned from pale to a ghastly, bruised purple. He stood up, his cane clattering to the floor. "Valerius!" he roared, his voice cracking. "What have you done?" The music stopped. The guests froze. Alaric didn't stop dancing. He spun Elara one last time before coming to a graceful halt. He turned to Moretti, his expression one of bored indifference. "I'm not sure what you mean, Don Moretti. My accounts in Switzerland, the shipping manifests in Sicily, they're gone. Everything is being frozen." Elara stepped forward, a faint, cold smile touching her lips. "Actually, they aren't gone, Don Moretti. They've been absorbed. While we were discussing semantics, the Valerius Foundation, under my direction, has filed an injunction with the International Maritime Board regarding irregularities in your family's holdings. As of 10 minutes ago, the Moretti family is technically insolvent." The ballroom went deathly silent. This wasn't a shooting. It was an execution by ink and wire. Elara had used her knowledge as a secretary, her understanding of Alaric's legitimate and illegitimate ledgers, to strike a blow that 1,000 bullets could never achieve. You bitch, Moretti screamed, reaching into his jacket. In a heartbeat, Alaric was in front of Elara, his suppressed pistol drawn and levelled at the old man's forehead, before Moretti could even clear his holster. Every Valerius guard in the room drew their weapons in a synchronized click of steel. "Careful, Moretti," Alaric hissed, his voice sounding like a blade being drawn over stone. "My wife just saved your life. If you're insolvent, you aren't a threat. And if you aren't a threat, I might let you live out your days in that nursing home in Florida you've been funneling money into. But if you draw that gun, you'll be buried in the same hole as your son." Moretti stared into Alaric's grey eyes and saw the absolute truth. The shadow hadn't gone soft. He had simply found a deadlier weapon. Slowly, the old man's hand came out of his jacket, empty. He slumped back into his chair, a defeated relic of a dying era. Alaric didn't lower his gun until Silas signalled the room was clear. He then turned back to Elara. He didn't look at her with the coldness of a boss or the heat of a lover. He looked at her with reverence. "Shall we go, Mrs. Valerius?" he asked, offering his arm. "I believe the party is over." They walked out of the ballroom through the rows of stunned guests and the powerless patriarch. As they reached the car, the cool night air hit them. Elara let out a long, shaky breath. "I think I'm going to be sick." Alaric pulled her into his arms, holding her against the car. "You were magnificent. You didn't just survive the debut, Elara. You killed an entire family without spilling a drop of blood." "It's not over, is it?" she asked, her head resting on his chest. "No," Alaric whispered, his eyes looking toward the dark horizon. But, for the first time, they aren't looking for the shadow. They're looking for the moon, and they have no idea how cold it can be. As the motorcade sped away from the estate, Elara looked at her onyx-encrusted dress. It was the debut of the new Valerius era. She was no longer the girl from Queens. She was the architect of their survival. The moon had finally eclipsed the sun, and the world was in shadow. The victory at the Moretti Gala had cemented Elara's position as a formidable force, but inside the walls of the Valerius penthouse, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Power came with a price, and for Alaric, that price was the reopening of wounds he had spent a decade trying to cauterize. The more legitimate the Valerius organization became, the more the ghosts of its violent past seemed to haunt the hallways. Alaric had retreated. For 3 days he had barely spoken, spending his hours in the dimly lit library or staring out at the rain-lashed skyline. The wounds from the tower attack were healing, but a deeper, more ancient pain had taken hold. Elara found him in the library at midnight. The room smelled of old paper, rain, and the sharp, medicinal sting of the ointment he had to apply to his scarred shoulder. He was shirtless, sitting on the edge of a leather chaise, struggling to reach a bandage on his back. "Let me," Elara said softly, stepping out of the shadows. Alaric stiffened, his muscles rippling under a map of scars. "I can handle it, Elara." "I know you can," she replied, taking the medical tape from his hand. "But you don't have to." She sat behind him, her fingers gentle as she peeled back the old dressing. Up close, the damage was breathtaking. Beyond the fresh puckered red of the bullet wounds were older marks, long, jagged white lines that told a story of a childhood spent in the crosshairs. "This one," she whispered, her finger hovering over a star-shaped scar near his spine. "You never told me about this." Alaric was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice came, low and hollow. I was 12. My father's rival thought a message sent through a son was louder than one sent through a soldier. He kept me in a basement for a week. Every day, he'd ask me where the ledger was. Every day, I told him I didn't know. Elara's breath hitched. She pressed a soft kiss to the skin beside the scar. I'm so sorry, Alaric. Don't be, he rasped, though she felt him shudder under her touch. It taught me that pain is just information. It taught me that the only way to protect what you love is to be more terrifying than the thing threatening it. He turned around to face her, his grey eyes clouded with a dark, swirling mist. That's why I brought you into this, Elara. Not because I'm a romantic, but because I'm a coward. I was so afraid of someone finding you, of someone doing to you what they did to me, that I decided to own you instead. I thought if I put you in a cage of my own making, the world couldn't reach you. Elara cupped his face, her thumb tracing the hard line of his jaw. You didn't put me in a cage, Alaric. You gave me a seat at the table. And yes, the world is dangerous, but for the first time in my life, I'm not a ghost watching it pass me by. I'm living it. With you. Alaric's gaze dropped to her lips. The intensity in his eyes was no longer possessive. It was vulnerable. I don't know how to be a husband, Elara. I only know how to be a Don. I only know how to count enemies and calculate risks. Then let me teach you, she whispered. Start by putting down the gun for one night. Just one night. Alaric looked at the suppressed pistol resting on the side table, then back at her. Slowly, he reached out and slid the weapon into the drawer, locking it with a click that sounded like a heavy sigh. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck. For the first time, he wasn't the shadow, the protector, or the monster. He was just a man, exhausted by the weight of his own armor. The Moretti transition is almost complete, she murmured, her hands stroking his hair. The legitimate shipping lanes are integrated. We're opening the new wing of the Children's Hospital next month. You're doing it, Alaric. You're changing the legacy. I hope it's enough, he said, his voice muffled. I hope the world lets us be. But even as they sat in the quiet of the library, a low chime echoed from Alaric's private phone, the one only Luca and Silas had the number for. Alaric pulled back, the wall of ice slamming back into place instantly. He grabbed the phone. Report, he commanded. He listened for a long minute, his face turning a ghastly shade of pale. Elara watched his knuckles turn white as he gripped the device. Where? Alaric asked. When? He hung up and stood, his movements jerky and filled with a sudden, frantic energy. What is it? Elara asked, her heart sinking. The past, Alaric said, reaching for his shirt. My brother. He's back. Elara froze. I didn't know you had a brother. I don't, Alaric said, his eyes turning cold and lethal. I have a ghost. Dante Valerius was supposed to have died in that basement when I was 12. My father told me he didn't make it. I buried an empty casket. He turned to her, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. But Luca just found him. He's in a Moretti safe house in the Bronx. And he's not there as a prisoner, Elara. He's there as their new Don. The betrayal hit the room like a physical blow. The shadows of the past hadn't just come to haunt Alaric. They had come to replace him. He knows everything, Alaric whispered, more to himself than to her. He knows our codes. He knows our childhood. He knows how I think. Alaric walked to the drawer, unlocked it, and pulled out his gun. The one night of peace had lasted less than an hour. Alaric, wait, Elara said, standing up. If he's been gone for 20 years, why now? Why show himself only after Victor is dead? Because he was waiting for me to go soft, Alaric spat, checking the magazine of his weapon. He was waiting for the moon to arrive. He thinks you're my weakness, Elara. He thinks he can use our blood to drown the legacy I'm trying to build. He crossed the room and grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip desperate. You stay here. You do not talk to anyone but Silas. Dante is a version of me that never found a reason to be human. He is the shadow without the light. Alaric, if he's your brother— I have no brother, he roared, then immediately softened, his forehead dropping against hers. I have only you, and I will not lose you to a dead man. As Alaric strode out of the library, his coat billowing behind him like a funeral shroud, Elara stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the books and the silence. The war with the Morettis had been about business. The war with Dante would be about the soul. And as she looked at the empty chaise, she realized that the shadows of the past were no longer just memories. They were coming to take everything the light had built. The revelation of Dante Valerius's existence acted like a drop of ink in a glass of clear water. Everything Elara thought she knew about Alaric's world was suddenly stained with a darker truth. The penthouse, once a fortress, now felt like a tomb. Alaric was gone, vanished into the rain-slicked labyrinth of the Bronx with Luca and a dozen of his best men, leaving Elara under the watchful, nervous eye of Silas. For 3 hours, Elara paced the conservatory. The glass walls reflected a woman she barely recognized, pale, sharp-eyed, and wearing a ring that felt like a hot iron. Silas, Elara said, her voice echoing in the vast space. Tell me about Dante. Alaric said he died when they were children. How is that possible? Silas stood by the door, his hands clasped in front of him, his face a mask of iron. The Don't Father was a man of difficult choices, Mrs. Valerius. When the basement was raided 20 years ago, only Alaric was found. The rival family claimed Dante had succumbed to his wounds. The body was never recovered because the building was torched. The old Don chose to believe his eldest son was dead, rather than think he was a prisoner for 2 decades. And Alaric lived with that guilt, Elara whispered. He thought he was the lucky one. He thought he was the only one, Silas corrected. Suddenly the secure elevator chime rang, a sound that made both of them jump. Silas drew his weapon in a fluid motion, stepping in front of Elara. The doors opened, Alaric stepped out. He was alone. His coat was drenched, and there was a smear of soot on his cheek. But it was his eyes that terrified Elara. They were hollow, as if the fire inside him had been replaced by ash. Alaric. Elara rushed to him, but he didn't pull her into his arms. He walked past her, heading straight for the bar. Where are Luca and the others? Silas asked, holstering his gun but remaining alert. Waiting at the perimeter, Alaric rasped, pouring a glass of neat bourbon. His hands were shaking. I saw him, Silas. I stood 10 feet away from him in that safe house. And? Elara asked, her heart hammering. Alaric turned, a bitter, ghost-like smile on his lips. He looks like me. He sounds like me. But he's wearing a Moretti ring. He told me that while I was being groomed to be the shadow, he was being forged into the blade that would eventually cut my throat. The Morettis didn't kill him. They raised him. They turned my father's greatest failure into their ultimate weapon. He downed the drink in one go, the glass clinking sharply against the marble counter. He knew about you, Elara. He knew your name before I even spoke it. He called you the beautiful liability. Elara felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. What does he want, Alaric? Is it just the business? The territory? He wants the name, Alaric said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He says that as the firstborn, the Valerius legacy belongs to him. He doesn't care about the legitimate shipping lanes or the hospitals. He wants to burn it all down and build a kingdom of corpses. He's offered me a choice. What choice? Alaric looked at her, and for the first time Elara saw a flicker of genuine hesitation in him. He wants an exchange. He will leave the Valerius holdings alone. He will let the transition to legitimacy happen. If I hand over the one thing the shadow cannot live without. The silence in the room was deafening. Elara felt the air turn to ice. "Me," she breathed. "I'm going to kill him," Alaric said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Brother or not, I will bury him so deep the earth will forget his name." "Alaric, wait," Elara said, moving toward him. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the frantic thud of his heart. If he's been waiting 20 years, he has a mole. He couldn't have known about our midnight wedding or the private details of the transition unless someone told him. Alaric's eyes narrowed. "I trust my men, Elara. Luca and Silas are blood." "It's not them," Elara said, her mind spinning. She remembered the legal documents, the tailors, the caterers, the lawyers, the silver-haired man who handled the deeds. He's the only one who had the full picture of the exit strategy and the French estate. Alaric froze. He turned to Silas. "Bring me Marcus Thorne, the lead attorney, now." "He's not at his office, sir," Silas said, checking his tablet. "His GPS signature has been deactivated." "Then find him," Alaric roared. As Silas hurried out, Alaric slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. The betrayal of a brother was one thing, but the vulnerability of his organization was another. He looked at Elara, his grey eyes filled with a desperate, agonizing love. "I can't protect you," he whispered. "Every wall I build has a crack. Every man I pay has a price." "Then stop building walls," Elara said, kneeling between his legs. She took his hands, forcing him to look at her. "Dante thinks I'm a liability because he thinks I'm just a woman you love. He thinks I'm a piece of jewelry you're afraid to lose. But I'm the one who integrated the shipping manifest. I'm the one who froze the Moretti accounts." "Elara, no. He wants to meet me. Fine. Let's set a meeting. But we don't go as the Shadow and his bride. We go as the Valerius partners. We show him that there is no crack in the foundation because we are the foundation." "It's a trap, Elara," Alaric said, his grip on her hands tightening. "He doesn't want to negotiate. He wants to tear my heart out while I'm watching." "Then we bring a bigger knife," she said, her hazel eyes flashing with a cold fire Alaric had never seen before. "We use the French estate as bait. We tell the lawyer we're fleeing. We lure Dante out of the Moretti shadow and onto ground we control." Alaric stared at her. He saw the soft girl from Queens and the ruthless architect of the gala merged into one terrifying, beautiful whole. He realized then that he had succeeded too well. He hadn't just saved her. He had forged a weapon he wasn't sure he could control. "You're going to be the death of me, Elara Moon," he murmured, pulling her into a kiss that tasted of bourbon and desperation. "No," she whispered against his lips. "I'm going to be the reason you live." The plan was set in motion within the hour. They leaked the information to the law firm's secure server. The Don and his wife are fleeing to the Marseille estate. Departure at 3 o'clock from Teterboro. But they didn't go to the airport. Instead, they went to the abandoned Valerius Cathedral in Harlem, a crumbling stone monument where Alaric's father had once made his blood oaths. It was a place of high rafters, broken stained glass and deep, cold shadows. Elara stood at the altar, wearing a coat of white wool, a stark contrast to the dark stone. Alaric was hidden in the confessionals, his rifle levelled at the main entrance. Luca and his team were in the bell tower. The heavy oak doors creaked open. A man stepped in. He moved with the same predatory grace as Alaric, but there was a jaggedness to him, a wildness that Alaric had learned to suppress. He was wearing a grey coat, and his face, revealed by a flash of lightning, was indeed a twisted mirror of Alaric's own. "Elara!" the man called out, his voice a haunting echo of her husband's. "You're even more radiant in person. My brother always had a penchant for the finest things." Elara didn't move. "Dante Valerius, I hear you've been looking for a family reunion." Dante laughed, a cold, dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for what's mine. The throne, the legacy, and the woman who seems to be holding the keys to both." He stepped closer, but then he stopped. He sniffed the air, his eyes widening. "Incense," he whispered, "and oil. Alaric's favorite scent for a funeral." "It's not his funeral, Dante." Alaric's voice boomed from the darkness. Dante spun around, drawing a pistol, but a red laser dot appeared on his chest. Then another. And another. "You're predictable," Alaric said, stepping out from the shadows, his own weapon raised. "You think like a Moretti. You thought I'd run to save her. You didn't realize she was the one who suggested the ambush." Dante looked at Elara, a flash of genuine shock, and perhaps respect, crossing his features. "Is that so? The moon has teeth." "She has everything you'll never have," Alaric spat. "Loyalty, a soul, a future." "A future?" Dante sneered. "Look at us, Alaric. We're vipers in a pit. There is no future for men like us. There is only the next strike." Suddenly, Dante's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't look at it. He just smiled. "You think this is the end of the play?" Dante asked. "I didn't come here to kill you, brother. I came here to see if you were still the boy who cried in the basement, and I found my answer." Dante dropped his gun. He raised his hands. "The Morettis aren't at the airport, Alaric, and they aren't here." Alaric's face went pale. "Where are they?" Dante's smile widened, revealing a row of sharp, white teeth. "Your friend, the one who introduced you to the architect. Jessica, wasn't it?" Elara felt the world tilt. "Jessica? What do you mean?" "She was so easy to find," Dante whispered. "She was the only link left to the life you used to have. While you were playing general in a cathedral, the Morettis were picking up a souvenir." Elara's phone rang. It was a video call from an unknown number. Alaric rushed to her side as she answered it. The screen flickered to life. It showed Jessica, bound and gagged in the back of a moving van. A masked man held a knife to her throat. "Give us the codes to the shipping conglomerate, or the girl dies," a distorted voice said. Elara looked at Dante, then at Alaric. The trap hadn't been for Alaric. It had been for her heart. "Checkmate, brother," Dante said softly, as the red laser dots on his chest disappeared. Luca's team had been distracted by a secondary breach at the perimeter. In the chaos that followed, Dante disappeared into the shadows of the cathedral, leaving Alaric and Elara standing in the ruins of their victory, holding a phone that contained the death sentence of an innocent. The shadow had been outmaneuvered, and the moon had just realized that, in this world, even the stars could be extinguished. The silence in the cathedral after Dante's departure was more deafening than the roar of gunfire. The video of Jessica, pale and trembling in the back of that van, looped in Elara's mind like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "Alaric," Elara whispered, her voice barely audible. "They have her. Because of me, because I wanted to play at being a Valerius." Alaric was already on his feet, his phone pressed to his ear, his face a terrifying mask of controlled violence. "Luca, get the trackers on the Thorn law firm's satellite uplink. Silas, I want every street camera within a 5-block radius of Jessica's apartment. If a bird chirps in that neighborhood, I want to know its blood type." He turned to Elara, seeing the way she was shaking. He crossed the stone floor and grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip firm, not to hurt, but to ground her. "Elara, look at me. This is what they do. They find the softest part of your soul, and they put a blade to it. But Jessica is not dead. Dead people have no leverage. She's a normal person, Alaric, Elara cried, tears finally breaking through. She doesn't know about codes or docs or Morettis. She's terrified. Then we use that terror against them, Alaric hissed. Dante thinks he's won because he's distracted us. He thinks I'll hand over the conglomerate to save your friend. Won't you? Alaric's eyes darkened. I will save her. But I won't give him the empire. If I give him the keys, he'll kill her anyway to prove he can. The only way to save Jessica is to make Dante more afraid of staying in New York than he is hungry for the throne. They returned to the penthouse, which had now been converted into a full-scale tactical command center. Elara sat at the center of the monitors, her fingers flying across the keys. She wasn't crying anymore. The grief had been replaced by a cold, surgical focus. If her life as a secretary had taught her anything, it was how to find a needle in a haystack of data. I found the van, Elara said, her voice sounding like ice clicking against glass. It's a stolen rental. It bypassed the tolls, but it triggered a red light camera in Long Island City 10 minutes ago. They're heading toward the old industrial park near the water. That's Moretti territory, Silas noted, checking his weapon. Dante is hiding in the heart of the beast. He's not hiding, Alaric said, pulling on a tactical vest. He's inviting us. He wants the shadow to come to him. He wants to kill me in front of the remains of the Moretti family to prove he's the new Alpha. Alaric walked over to a secure locker and pulled out a briefcase. Inside were the hard drive keys to Valerius Holdings, the entire legitimate side of the business. Millions in assets, the future of their legacy. You're taking them? Elara asked. I'm taking a bomb, Alaric replied. Inside these keys is a worm. The moment they are plugged into a server, they'll trigger a wipe of every Moretti-controlled account we've been monitoring. If Dante wants the keys to the kingdom, I'll give him keys that lock the doors from the outside. I'm coming with you, Elara said, standing up. Absolutely not. Alaric, she's my friend. She won't recognize you. She'll be too terrified to move. She needs to see a face she trusts, or she'll freeze when the shooting starts. It's too dangerous, Elara. Dante is erratic. He spent 20 years in a basement of rage. And I spent 2 years being the one person you couldn't live without, she countered, stepping into his space. You said we are the foundation. You can't leave half the foundation behind and expect the building to stand. Alaric stared at her. He saw the ivory-clad bride he had married at midnight, now replaced by a woman with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. He reached out, his gloved hand cupping her cheek. If anything happens to you... Nothing will, she promised, because the shadow is watching. The industrial park was a graveyard of rusted iron and rotting wood. The rain had turned to a thick, suffocating fog that swallowed the light of the moon. They moved in 3 teams. Luca and the snipers took the rooftops. Silas and the heavy hitters approached from the rear. Alaric and Elara walked straight through the front gates of the abandoned bottling plant. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Inside the plant was a cavernous space of echoing shadows. In the center, under a single flickering halogen light, sat Jessica. She was tied to a steel chair, her mouth covered in silver duct tape. Her eyes were wide with a primal, heart-wrenching terror. Standing behind her, his hand resting casually on her shoulder, was Dante. He was holding a jagged combat knife, the blade glinting in the sickly yellow light. "You're late, brother," Dante called out, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. "I almost thought you decided the girl wasn't worth the price of admission." Alaric stopped 20 feet away. Elara stood a step behind him, her heart shattering as Jessica's eyes found hers. "I'm sorry, Jess," she thought. "I'm so sorry." "Let her go, Dante," Alaric said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. You have the dawn, you have the shadow. The girl is a nobody. She's not a nobody to her, Dante said, gesturing with the knife toward Elara. She's the link to the normal life your wife pretends she can still have. Killing her isn't about business, Alaric. It's about making sure the moon never feels safe again. Dante leaned down, whispering into Jessica's ear. She sobbed behind the tape, her body lurching in the chair. "The keys, Alaric," Dante demanded, held out his hand. "Throw them over, or I start with her ears. I hear architects like a woman who can listen to their dreams." Alaric held up the briefcase. "Everything is in here, the offshore accounts, the real estate deeds, the shipping manifests. It's the entire Valerius future." "Throw it," Dante barked. Alaric tossed the briefcase. It skidded across the gritty floor, stopping at Dante's feet. Dante didn't let go of Jessica. He kicked the case open with one foot, seeing the glowing LED of the hardware keys. A slow, hungry smile spread across his face, the face that was a mirror of Alaric's. "You really did it," Dante laughed. "You traded an empire for a secretary's friend. You've gone so soft I can smell the rot." "The girl, Dante," Alaric said, his hand slowly moving toward the small of his back. "Now." Dante looked at Jessica, then at Elara. His eyes were filled with a sudden, sharp malice. "I think I'll keep her. A little insurance. I don't trust you, brother. You have that 'I'm about to kill everyone' look in your eyes." "Dante, don't," Elara said, stepping forward. "You have what you want. If you take her, the alliance with the other families breaks. You'll have an empire, but you'll be at war with everyone before the sun rises." Dante paused, considering. "She's smart, Alaric. I see why you kept her." But as Dante shifted his weight, his phone buzzed, the same signal he'd received at the cathedral. His face changed. The smirk vanished, replaced by a twitch of pure paranoia. "You brought the teams," Dante hissed, his eyes darting to the rafters. "I told you no teams." "I brought my family," Alaric corrected. Dante didn't wait. He raised the knife. "Luca, now!" Alaric roared. A sniper round shattered the halogen light above them. The room plunged into darkness. Elara didn't think. She sprinted toward Jessica as gunfire erupted from the shadows, not from Alaric's men, but from Moretti loyalists hidden in the machinery. "Jess!" Elara screamed, reaching the chair. She fumbled with the ropes, her fingers slick with sweat. A hand grabbed her hair, yanking her back. Dante's face appeared in the strobe light flashes of muzzle fire. "If I can't have the throne, I'll take the heart." He raised the knife to Elara's throat. Crack! The sound of a single, close-range pistol shot echoed through the plant. Dante froze. He looked down at his chest, where a dark circle was blooming on his grey coat. He looked back at Alaric, who was standing 5 feet away, his arm extended, his eyes cold and empty of mercy. "You were my brother," Alaric said, his voice a ghost of a whisper. "But you touched my wife." Dante stumbled back, the knife falling from his hand. He hit the floor, his eyes fixed on the distant rafters. "The basement," he wheezed. "It never ended." Alaric didn't watch him die. He was already at Elara's side, shielding her body with his own, as Silas and Luca moved in to sweep the remaining Moretti shooters. "Elara, are you hurt?" Alaric's hands were all over her, checking for blood, for wounds. "I'm fine," she gasped, pointing at the chair. "Jessica." She tore the tape from Jessica's mouth. Her friend let out a primal, soul-deep scream, collapsing into Elara's arms. "It's okay. It's okay," Elara sobbed, rocking her. "You're safe. I've got you." Jessica pushed her away, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. She looked at Alaric, who was covered in blood, standing over the body of his own brother. She looked at the men in tactical gear, the smoking guns, the cold efficiency of death. "What are you?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "Elara, what have you become?" Elara looked down at her hands. They were stained with the soot of the bottling plant and the blood of a war she had helped orchestrate. She looked at the ring on her finger. "I'm a Valerius, Jess," she said, and for the first time, the words felt like a confession. Jessica scrambled back, her face filled with a terror that Elara knew would never truly fade. She didn't see her best friend. She saw a stranger. Alaric stepped forward, reaching for Elara, but she stayed on the floor, watching as Silas led a catatonic Jessica toward an ambulance. The battle was won. Dante was dead. The Moretti remnants were scattered, but as Elara looked at the shadows stretching across the factory floor, she realized that the price of her crown wasn't just blood. It was the death of the girl she used to be. Alaric knelt beside her, pulling her into his chest. "It's over, Elara. It's over." "No," she whispered, watching the ambulance lights fade into the fog. "It's just the beginning." The bottling plant was a graveyard of twisted metal and cooling bodies. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy copper tang of blood. Dante Valerius lay dead, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as if still searching for the sky he had lost 20 years ago. Alaric stood in the center of the carnage, the suppressed pistol still smoking in his hand. He looked like a statue carved from the darkness itself. He didn't look at his brother's corpse. He didn't look at his men as they moved with surgical precision to clean the site. He looked only at Elara, who was still kneeling on the cold, gritty floor, her white coat now a canvas of grey ash and crimson spray. "Elara," he said, his voice a low, ragged rasp. She looked up at him. For the first time she saw the monster he had warned her about. This wasn't the man who kissed her forehead in the library. This was the shadow of death, a predator who had just executed his own blood to ensure her safety. She reached out her hand and he took it, pulling her to her feet with a strength that felt like it could crush bone. "Is she safe?" Elara whispered, looking toward the ambulance that had taken Jessica away. "Silas is with her," Alaric replied, his eyes searching hers for a sign of revulsion. "She's being taken to a private clinic. She'll have the best care, but Elara—" "I know," she cut him off. "She'll never look at me the same way again. I'm the villain in her story now." Alaric pulled her into his chest, his heart thundering against her ear. "You are the survivor in mine. That is all that matters." The return to the penthouse was a journey through a city that felt like a foreign country. The lights of Manhattan were bright and indifferent, unaware of the war that had just ended in its shadows. Inside the apartment, the tactical teams retreated, leaving a heavy, oppressive silence. Alaric went straight to the bar, but his hand stopped before he could pour a drink. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, a man covered in the blood of his brother. "He was my heart," Alaric whispered, so quiet Elara almost didn't hear him. "Before the basement, Dante was the one who protected me. He used to hide me in the cedar closet when our father was angry. He was the better version of us." Elara walked to him, taking the glass from his hand and setting it aside. She reached up, unbuttoning his tactical vest, peeling away the layers of the monster until she found the man beneath. "The Dante you loved died 20 years ago, Alaric," she said, her voice firm. "The man in that plant was a weapon built by the Morettis. He didn't want a brother. He wanted a sacrifice. I killed him, Elara. I didn't hesitate. I felt nothing, just the need to see him stop breathing near you." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a terrifying, hollow despair. "That is what I am. That is what you married. A man who can kill his own blood and go back to his scotch." "No," Elara said, cupping his face, forcing him to look at her. You are a man who endured 20 years of ghosts to build something better. Dante was the past trying to drag you back into the basement. You didn't kill your brother. You killed the darkness that was trying to swallow our future. She led him to the bathroom where the black marble tub was already filling with hot water. She stripped him of his ruined clothes, her hands steady as she washed the soot and blood from his skin. It was a ritual of purification, a silent vow that the stains of the night wouldn't touch the home they had built. As they lay in bed later, the moon was a silver sliver outside the glass walls. Alaric held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her neck, as if she were his only anchor to the world of the living. The Morettis are finished, Alaric murmured into the dark. With Dante dead and their accounts wiped, they have no leadership, no money, and no allies. The other families will pick the carcass clean by morning. Is it over then? Elara asked. The war? The war with them is over, Alaric said, his grip tightening. But the war for our legitimacy is just beginning. The feds will be looking for someone to blame for the bottling plant. The commission will want to know why a Valerius executed a Valerius. Let them ask, Elara said, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the ring on her finger. We have the ledgers, we have the influence, and we have each other. The next morning, the monster's mercy was revealed. Alaric didn't just dismantle the Moretti Empire, he absorbed it. He didn't execute the remaining lieutenants. He gave them a choice: life imprisonment, via the evidence he would hand over to the FBI, or a new life working for the Valerius Foundation's legitimate shipping lanes. It was a brilliant, ruthless move. He didn't leave a power vacuum for someone else to fill. He filled it himself, with men who owed him their lives and their freedom. But the most difficult part of the mercy was yet to come. Elara went to the clinic to see Jessica. The facility was a high-security sanctuary, hidden behind ivy-covered walls in Westchester. Jessica was sitting on a terrace looking out at the gardens. She looked physically fine, but her eyes were vacant, fixed on a world that no longer made sense. When she saw Elara, she didn't smile. She didn't move. Jess, Elara said, sitting in the chair beside her. They told me you're a CEO now, Jessica said, her voice flat. They told me the man who kidnapped me is dead, that his own brother shot him. He was trying to hurt you to get to us, Elara said, her throat tight. I am so sorry, Jess. I never wanted you to be part of this. Jessica turned to look at her. You aren't Elara anymore. Elara used to worry about whether a guy would text her back. Elara used to help me pick out shoes. You talk about families and territory. You look at blood and you don't even flinch. I had to change to survive, Elara whispered. No, Jessica said, a single tear tracking down her cheek. You changed because you loved the shadow more than the light. I can't be near you, Elle. Every time I look at you, I'll see that knife. I'll hear the gunfire. I understand, Elara said, the pain in her chest sharp and absolute. Alaric has set up a trust for you. You can go anywhere. You can have any life you want. You'll never have to worry about money or safety again. Blood money, Jessica said, but she didn't refuse it. She couldn't. The world of the normal had been shattered for her, too. As Elara walked out of the clinic, she found Alaric waiting by the car. He saw the grief on her face and pulled her into his arms, shielding her from the prying eyes of the world. She's gone, Alaric, Elara sobbed into his chest. My old life, it's gone. I know, he whispered, his eyes looking over her head toward the distant skyline of the city they now owned. But you have a new one. A life where you are never invisible. A life where you are the queen of a kingdom we built from the ashes. Elara pulled back, wiping her eyes. She looked at the Valerius tower rising like a dark needle into the clouds. The secretary was dead. The friend was gone. "Then let's rule it," she said, her voice cold and certain. Alaric smiled, a sharp, predatory look that finally matched her own. "That's my girl." The war for the soul was over. The reign of the moon and the shadow had truly begun. The fall of the Moretti family and the death of Dante Valerius had left a vacuum in the underworld that was being filled with whispered rumors and sharpening knives. In the world of the five families, killing your own blood was the ultimate taboo, a sin that demanded an explanation before the commission, the shadowy council that governed the nation's most powerful criminal organizations. Alaric had been summoned, and for the first time in history, the summons included a seat for a woman. "They won't be looking for the truth," Alaric said, his voice low as he adjusted his cufflinks. He stood in front of the mahogany mirror, his reflection a sharp contrast to the man who had been covered in soot and blood only days ago. "They'll be looking for a reason to dismantle us. Dante's return gave them hope that the Valerius line was fractured. My execution of him gave them an excuse to call us unstable." Elara walked toward him, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. She wore a suit of charcoal silk, tailored to look like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, lethal ponytail, and the Valerius emerald sat at the base of her throat like a green eye. "Then we don't give them an excuse," she said, reaching up to straighten his tie. "We give them a reality check. We show them that the Valerius organization isn't just a family, it's an institution. The commission is held in the basement of an old social club in Little Italy," Alaric warned, his hands covering hers. "It is a place where the air smells of old cigars and ancient grudges. Are you ready to walk into the lion's den, Mrs. Valerius?" "I've already stared down the monster," she replied, meeting his grey gaze. "The lions don't scare me." The social club was a relic of a dying era. Red velvet curtains, wood-panelled walls, and a thick, suffocating layer of smoke. At the centre of the back room was a circular table. 4 men sat there, the dons of the remaining families. Don Chen, Don Russo, Don O'Malley, and the ancient, bitter Don Moretti, who was only there to witness the final carving of his own legacy. As Alaric and Elara entered, the conversation died instantly. The clink of ice in glasses was the only sound. "Alaric," Don Chen said, his voice smooth and neutral. He was the youngest of the elders, a man who preferred spreadsheets to shakedowns. "And the lady of the tower. We didn't expect you to bring your counselor." "My wife is the CEO of Valerius Holdings," Alaric said, taking his seat at the table. Elara sat beside him, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of bored indifference. "She holds the keys to the assets you're all currently salivating over. It felt efficient to have her here." "Efficient!" Moretti wheezed, his hands trembling on the table. "You killed your brother, Alaric. You executed the firstborn of the Valerius line in a bottling plant like a common snitch. The commission cannot let fratricide go unpunished." "Dante Valerius died 20 years ago," Alaric replied, his voice a cold, steady rumble. "The man I killed was a Moretti operative who kidnapped a civilian and threatened the stability of the entire New York infrastructure. I didn't kill a brother. I removed a cancer." "A cancer that had a claim to your throne," Don Russo added, leaning forward. "There are rules, Alaric. If we allow leaders to execute their siblings whenever a dispute arises, the streets will run red within a week." Elara chose that moment to speak. She didn't raise her voice, but the clarity of it cut through the smoke like a blade. "There are also rules about harboring traitors," she said, looking directly at Moretti. "Dante Valerius was kept as a pet by your son for 2 decades. He was weaponized against a sitting don. That is a violation of the 1994 Treaty of Cooperation. By supporting Dante's claim, the Moretti family forfeited their seat and their protection. She opened a leather folder and slid a single sheet of paper into the center of the table. This is a record of the wire transfers from the Moretti offshore accounts to Dante's safe houses over the last 6 months. It also includes the communication logs between Dante and several lieutenants, currently sitting in this room. The atmosphere in the room shifted from hostile to predatory. The other dons looked at each other, the suspicion in their eyes growing. "You're accusing us of conspiracy," O'Malley asked, his Irish lilt sharpening. "I'm accusing you of being late to the party," Elara replied coolly. "The Moretti Empire is gone. Its assets have been liquidated or absorbed into Valerius holdings. If you want a piece of the new shipping lanes, you'll stop talking about fratricide and start talking about partnership." Alaric leaned back, a faint, dark smile touching his lips. He watched as the most dangerous men in America were dismantled by a woman who, 6 months ago, was worrying about his dry cleaning. "The Valerius organization is moving to full legitimacy within 2 years, Alaric announced, his voice commanding the room. "The docks, the construction unions, and the waste management contracts will stay under our umbrella, but they will be clean. We are offering you a chance to buy in. You get the profits, we provide the legal cover." "And if we refuse?" Rousseau asked. "Then you continue to fight the FBI, the IRS, and the ghosts of your own past," Alaric said, "while we build the future." Don Chen was the first to move. He reached out and picked up the paper Elara had provided. He scanned it, then looked at her with a look of genuine respect. "The moon has a sharp mind," Chen murmured. "I accept the terms. The Chen family will cooperate with the transition." One by one, the other dons nodded. Even Moretti remained silent, his power stripped away by the very woman he had called a commoner. As they walked out of the social club and into the cool night air, the adrenaline finally began to ebb away. Elara felt a slight tremor in her hands. Alaric caught her, pulling her into the shadow of a brick archway. He didn't say anything at first. He just held her, his heart beating a steady, rhythmic song against hers. "You were a lioness," he whispered into her hair. "They were terrified of you." "I was terrified of them," she admitted, leaning into his strength. "But then I looked at them and realized they're just old men holding onto a world that's already dead." Alaric pulled back, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You've done it, Elara. You've given us a way out. The Commission won't touch us now. We're too valuable to them." "Is it enough?" she asked. "To be safe?" "It's a start," he said. But as they reached their car, Luca was waiting with a grim expression. He held out a tablet. "We have a problem," Luca said. "The FBI didn't wait for the Commission's judgment. They've just issued a warrant for Alaric's arrest regarding the incident at the bottling plant. They have a witness." Elara's heart stopped. "A witness? Who? All the Morettis are dead or in our pocket." Luca looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, echoing pity. "It's not a Moretti, Mrs. Valerius. It's Marcus, the architect. He was at the restaurant, and he's been talking to the feds about Alaric's abduction of you. He's claiming you're being held under duress. He's testifying that the entire marriage is a kidnapping." Alaric's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively moving to the small of his back where his gun was tucked. "The light is trying to find us again," Alaric hissed. Elara looked at the ring on her finger. Marcus, the man who represented the life she had left behind. He thought he was saving her, but he was inadvertently handing Alaric a life sentence. "I'll talk to him," Elara said, her voice turning into steel. "No," Alaric said. "It's too late for talk." "I'm the only one who can stop this," she insisted. "If I testify that I'm here by choice, the case falls apart. But if you touch him, Alaric, If you hurt Marcus, you prove every word he's saying is true. You'll be the monster he thinks you are. Alaric looked at the city, the towers glowing like silent sentinels. He was a man of shadows, but the woman in his arms was the only thing that made the light worth fighting for. "One chance," Alaric rasped. "You have one chance to silence the architect before I have to do it my way." The war for legitimacy had just hit its most dangerous obstacle, the truth. The air in the Valerius penthouse was no longer thick with the scent of gunpowder, but with something far more volatile: the past. Elara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the red and blue lights of a distant police cruiser flicker through the Manhattan haze. Marcus, the man who had held her hand in a sunlit restaurant only a lifetime ago, was now the weapon the federal government was using to dismantle her world. He wasn't a hitman or a don. He was a good man, and in Alaric's world, a good man with a righteous cause was more dangerous than 1,000 soldiers. "The FBI has him in a safe house," Alaric said, his voice coming from the shadows of the library door. He was dressed in a dark, tactical turtleneck, the lines of his face hard and uncompromising. "They're prepping him for a grand jury. He's telling them you're a victim of Stockholm Syndrome, Elara. He's telling them I'm the monster who stole your soul." Elara turned, her charcoal silk suit shimmering like oil. "He thinks he's saving me, Alaric. He doesn't understand that the girl he knew died the moment Victor Moretti drew a gun." "It doesn't matter what he understands," Alaric growled, stepping into the light. He began to check the magazine of his pistol with a rhythmic, terrifying efficiency. "He's a threat. If he testifies, a judge will sign the RICO warrants. They'll freeze every legitimate asset we've moved. They'll take you away from me in handcuffs for your own protection." "You can't kill him," Elara said, her voice a sharp command. Alaric stopped. He looked at her, his grey eyes flashing with a dark, primal jealousy. "He's trying to take you from me. My brother couldn't do it. The Morettis couldn't do it. I will not lose you to an architect with a hero complex. If he dies or even disappears, you confirm the kidnapping charge," Elara countered, walking toward him. She placed her hand over his, stopping the movement of the gun. "The FBI is waiting for you to strike. They want you to prove Marcus right. They want the monster to show his face so they can put it on a wanted poster." "Then what do we do?" Alaric hissed, his forehead dropping against hers. "I can't let him speak, Elara. I won't let them take you. I told you. I'll go to him." "No, it's a trap. The safe house will be crawling with feds." "Not if I go as the victim," she whispered. "I'll reach out to his personal cell. He'll keep it a secret because he thinks he's orchestrating an escape. I'll go alone. No Luca, no Silas, just me." Alaric's grip on her waist tightened until it was painful. "I will not let you walk into a cage, Elara. Not for him." "It's not for him," she said, cupping his face. "It's for us. Trust me, Alaric. I spent 2 years managing your secrets. I know exactly which soft words to use to break a man's resolve." The meeting took place in a small, nondescript park in Brooklyn, just a few miles from the federal safe house. The air was cold, smelling of damp earth and exhaust. Elara sat on a wooden bench, wearing a simple wool coat and no jewelry. She had left the emerald in the safe. She had even turned the Valerius ring inward so only the plain gold band showed. Marcus arrived 10 minutes late, looking frantic. His hair was disheveled and his eyes were rimmed with red. When he saw her, he nearly tripped over his own feet. "Elara!" he gasped, rushing to her. He reached for her hands, his touch feeling strange and alien to her now. "Oh God, you're okay. I've been so worried. The feds said it might take weeks to get you out, but you escaped. Did you get away from him?" Elara didn't pull her hands away, but she didn't squeeze back. I'm not an escapee, Marcus. I'm a wife. Marcus froze. He let go of her hands as if they had turned to ice. No, don't say that. They told me about the Stockholm effect. He's brainwashed you. He's a murderer, Elara. He killed his own brother. The news is full of it. Unidentified remains in a bottling plant. I saw him take you. I saw the look in his eyes. You saw a man claiming what he loves, Elara said, her voice soft and terrifyingly calm. And yes, Alaric is a dangerous man, but he's a man who would burn the city to keep me safe. Can you say the same, Marcus? I'm trying to save you, Marcus cried, his voice attracting the attention of a passing dog walker. I'm talking to the district attorney. I'm going to put him away for life. You'll be free, Elara. You can go back to Queens. You can go back to your life. My life in Queens was a graveyard, Marcus, she said, standing up. She stepped into his space the same way Alaric did when he wanted to dominate a room. I was a ghost. I was invisible. Alaric saw me. He gave me a seat at the head of a table that controls the world. Why would I ever want to go back to being a secretary who worries about her rent? Because it's wrong, Marcus yelled. It's blood money. It's evil. It's power, she corrected, and it's mine. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. She held it up so he could see the red light. I've been recording this entire conversation, Marcus. You just admitted that the FBI is coaching you. You just admitted that you're doing this out of a personal vendetta because you feel humiliated. If this tape reaches the DA, your credibility as a witness is shot. You'll be seen as a jilted suitor trying to harass a married woman. Marcus stared at the recorder, his face draining of color. You're protecting him. After everything he is, you're choosing him. I'm choosing my life, Elara said. She reached out and touched his cheek, a gesture of soft words and broken glass. Go home, Marcus. Tell the feds you made a mistake. Tell them you were confused by the trauma of the restaurant. If you do that, you live. You go back to your blueprints and your jazz clubs. And if I don't? Elara's eyes turned into grey shards, reflecting the shadow of the man waiting for her in the car a block away. Then the monster you're so afraid of won't have any reason to stay in his cage, and I won't be there to stop him. Elara returned to the penthouse an hour later. Alaric was waiting by the door, his eyes scanning her for any sign of distress. When he saw she was unharmed, the tension in his frame snapped. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. Is it done? He rasped. He's backing down, Elara said, her head resting on his shoulder. He's terrified, Alaric. He saw the monster in me today, not in you. Alaric pulled back, looking at her with a mix of awe and agony. He saw the coldness in her hazel eyes, the way she had dismantled a good man without shedding a tear. I've ruined you, he whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. I've turned the moon into a weapon. You didn't ruin me, she said, reaching up to pull his head down to hers. You just gave me a reason to fight. Marcus wanted me to be a victim so he could be a hero. You let me be a partner so we could be survivors. Alaric kissed her then. Not a kiss of possession, but one of profound, desperate gratitude. He had spent his life thinking the only way to be safe was to be alone in the dark. But as he looked at Elara, he realized that the shadow was only half the story. The FBI will drop the warrants by morning, Elara said against his lips. The architect is gone. The light has retreated. Then tonight, we celebrate, Alaric murmured, leading her toward the bedroom. Not as a Don and his bride, but as the only two people in this world who truly know each other. As the city lights sparkled outside, Elara Moon lay in the arms of the shadow. The glass of her old life was shattered, but in the soft words of the man she loved, she found a new kind of peace. She was no longer afraid of the dark. She was the one who owned it. The victory over Marcus and the withdrawal of the FBI warrants brought a temporary, fragile peace to the Valerius Tower. The empire was stabilizing. The transition to legitimacy was nearly 70% complete. But as the external storms died down, a new, quiet revolution was beginning inside Elara's own body. It started with a subtle shift, a sudden aversion to the scent of Alaric's expensive sandalwood soap, a lingering fatigue that even the strongest espresso couldn't break, and a strange, grounding calm that replaced her usual razor-sharp anxiety. Elara sat in the master suite, the morning sun bleeding through the glass walls. On the marble vanity lay a small plastic stick, 2 pink lines. Her heart didn't race with fear. It hummed with a primal, terrifying protectiveness. A life, a Valerius heir, a child born of the shadow and the moon. Elara. Alaric's voice came from the doorway. He was dressed for a meeting with the port authorities, looking every inch the legitimate Titan. He stopped when he saw her expression, his eyes instantly narrowing with concern. What is it? Did the feds reach out again? Is it Dante's remnants? Elara stood up, her hand instinctively hovering over her stomach. She didn't speak. She simply picked up the test and held it out to him. Alaric took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. As the reality of the 2 lines registered, his entire body went rigid. The man who had faced down firing squads and stared into the eyes of death without blinking looked utterly, completely undone. "Elara," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Is this... Are you... I'm pregnant, Alaric." He dropped the test onto the vanity and pulled her into his arms with a desperation that stole her breath. He buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking with a silent, heavy shudder. He wasn't just happy, he was terrified. "A child," he whispered against her skin. "I'm going to be a father." "We're going to be parents," she corrected, pulling back to look at him. Alaric's face was a map of conflicting emotions. Joy, yes, but beneath it was the cold, calculating fear of a man who knew exactly how many enemies he had. "Everything has to change. The security protocols, the transition. I won't have my son or daughter growing up in a house where the walls bleed secrets." "Alaric, the transition is almost done," Elara said softly. "It's not fast enough," he roared, then immediately lowered his voice, his hands cupping her face. "I spent my life thinking the Valerius name was a curse. I thought I was the end of the line, Elara. I thought the darkness would die with me. But now... Now it's a legacy," she said. "A real one. Not one of blood, but one of power used for good." The news of the heir was kept to a strictly need-to-know basis, which meant only Luca and Silas were informed. But even the most reinforced walls have ears, and in the world of the 5 families, a pregnancy was not just a personal joy, it was a shift in the political landscape. "Don Chen sent a gift," Silas reported later that afternoon, placing a small, hand-carved wooden cradle in the library. "He says he heard the moon is waxen. He's offering his congratulations." Alaric's jaw tightened. Chen is smart. He's telling us he knows. It's a subtle reminder that no matter how legitimate we become, we are still part of their web. Elara walked to the cradle, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. "Let him know. Let them all know. If they see us as a family, they see us as a unit they can't break. We aren't just protecting a business anymore, Alaric. We're protecting a future." But the pregnancy changed the stakes of the empire in a way Elara hadn't anticipated. Alaric became obsessed. He doubled the guards. He insisted on a medical wing being built inside the penthouse, so she would never have to leave for an appointment. He vetted every piece of fruit she ate, every breath of air she took. "You're suffocating me," Elara said one evening as Alaric reviewed the tactical positions for their upcoming trip to the Foundation Gala. "I am securing you," Alaric replied without looking up. "I'm a woman, Alaric, not a porcelain doll," she said, closing his laptop. "Our child needs a mother who is strong, not one who is hidden in a basement of silk." Alaric looked at her, his grey eyes burning with a dark, suffocating love. "My brother died because my father couldn't protect him. I spent 20 years thinking I was a ghost because I wasn't enough. I will not let history repeat itself. Not with you. Not with this baby." "Then finish the transition," Elara challenged. "The Moretti remnants are still clinging to the old docks. The Russo family is still trying to skim off the waste management contracts. Close the doors, Alaric. End the shadow so the child can live in the light." Alaric was silent for a long time. He reached out, his hand resting gently over hers on her stomach. He felt the faint, steady pulse of a new life, the only thing in the world that was truly, purely his. "One final move," Alaric whispered. "The Moretti remnants have a hidden cache of ledgers, the Black Books. They contain the names of every judge and politician they've bought over 50 years. If I get those books, I don't just win, I own the law. I can wipe our slate clean forever." "Where are they?" "A secure vault in the Moretti estate, the one we bypassed during the gala." "It's a suicide mission," Elara said, her heart clenching. "Not for me," Alaric said, his eyes turning into shards of lethal silver. "I'm the shadow. I thrive in the dark. I'll go in tonight. By dawn, the Valerius name will be untouchable." The night Alaric left for the Moretti estate was the longest of Elara's life. She sat in the conservatory, watching the rain wash over the city. She felt the heavy weight of the ring on her finger, the wolf and the moon. She realized then that the shadow was never a title Alaric wanted. It was a shield he had worn to keep his heart from breaking. And now, she was that heart. At 3 o'clock, the comms on the table crackled. "Luca to tower. We have the package. We're coming home." Elara let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for months. But a second later, the radio exploded with the sound of gunfire and screaming tires. "Ambush!" Luca's voice yelled over the static. "They were waiting. Moretti's men. They aren't alone. It's Russo. The alliance is broken." "Alaric!" Elara screamed into the comms. "Alaric! Answer me!" Silence. Only the sound of rain and distant sirens. Elara stood up, her hand gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked at Silas, who was already drawing his weapon and signalling the tactical teams. "Stay here, Mrs. Valerius," Silas commanded, his voice cold. "No," Elara said, her hazel eyes flashing with a terrifying, maternal fury. "My husband is out there and he has the keys to our child's future. If the Russo family wants a war, they can have one. But they forgot one thing." She reached into the desk drawer and pulled out the suppressed pistol Alaric had taught her to use. "The moon doesn't just reflect the light," she whispered, her voice sounding exactly like the shadows. "It controls the tide, and tonight I'm drowning them all." The stakes had reached their breaking point. The Empire was in flames, and the new heir was waiting to be born into a world that was determined to burn. The Valerius Tower, once a symbol of cold, corporate elegance, had transformed into a fortress of jagged shadows. The air hummed with the electric tension of a command center at the brink of collapse. Every screen in the room flickered with distorted feeds from the Jersey docks, muzzle flashes illuminating the rain, the silhouettes of black SUVs weaving through a maze of shipping containers. "Status!" Elara barked, her voice cutting through the chaos of shouting tech ops and the rhythmic clicking of firearms being readied. Communication is fragmented, Mrs. Valerius, Silas reported, his face grim as he monitored the tactical map. The Russo family didn't just ambush the motorcade, they've locked down the entire district. They're using jammers. Alaric and Luca are pinned down in the Moretti vault. They're trapped. Elara looked at the emerald at her throat, its green light feeling like a cold weight. In her other hand, the suppressed pistol felt heavy. Not with metal, but with the burden of the legacy she was now forced to carry. They think Alaric is the only head of this beast, Elara said, her eyes turning into shards of lethal hazel. They think that if they cut him off, the rest of us will scatter. They've forgotten who balances the ledgers. She turned to the tactical team, 20 men in matte black gear, the elite of the Valerius Guard. Russo wants a war? Then we give him one that he can't survive. We aren't going in to negotiate, we are going in to harvest. Mrs. Valerius, Alaric's orders were clear. Silas hesitated. You are the priority. If the heir is... The heir needs a father, Elara snapped, stepping into his space. The monster's mercy she had witnessed months ago had finally taken root in her own soul. And the Valerius organization needs to remind this city why we are the only family that matters. Move the armored units. We strike the Russo central hub while I lead the extraction team to the docks. You're going in? Silas's eyes widened. I'm the only one they won't shoot on sight, she said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. They want the black books. They want the power. They'll think I'm coming to trade. While they're looking at the woman in the charcoal suit, you'll be the ones in the shadows. The Jersey docks were a labyrinth of rusted iron and freezing rain. The smell of salt was choked out by the stench of burning rubber and cordite. Elara sat in the back of a reinforced SUV, her hand resting over her stomach. Stay quiet, little one, she thought. Your father is just around the corner. The vehicle came to a screeching halt 50 yards from the Moretti vault. A line of Russo soldiers stood there, weapons levelled. At the centre stood Anthony Russo, a man who looked more like a sleazy accountant than a don, but his eyes held the hollow greed of a predator. Elara stepped out of the car alone. The rain instantly soaked her hair, plastering it to her face, but she didn't flinch. She walked toward the line of guns with a measured, regal grace. "Mrs. Valerius!" Russo called out, his voice oily. "How brave, or perhaps how foolish. Where is the shadow, hiding behind a wall of steel?" "My husband is exactly where he needs to be," Elara said, stopping 10 feet from him. "And I am here to offer you the only thing you actually want, the codes to the black books." Russo's eyes lit up with a sickening hunger. "Smart girl. Give them to me, and maybe I'll let Alaric live long enough to watch you sign over the rest of the empire." "The codes aren't on a piece of paper, Anthony," she said, moving closer, her voice soft and lethal. "They are encrypted in the Valerius Foundation's central server. Only I have the biometric key." She held up her left hand, the one wearing the ring of the wolf and the moon. Russo reached for her hand, his greed overriding his caution. But as his fingers brushed the gold band, Elara's expression shifted. The ghost was gone. The secretary was a myth. "Now," she whispered. The darkness of the docks exploded. Silas and the extraction team erupted from the shadows of the nearby containers. The sound of suppressed fire was like a swarm of angry hornets. Elara didn't drop to the ground. She drew her own weapon and fired 3 rounds into the radiator of the Russo lead vehicle, the steam creating a blinding veil of white. In the confusion, the heavy steel door of the Moretti vault groaned open. Alaric emerged like a demon rising from the pit. He was covered in soot, his shirt torn and soaked in blood, a submachine gun in each hand. He didn't look for Russo. He didn't look for the exit. He looked for the silver-grey flash of Elara's suit. "Elara!" he roared, his voice a primal sound of relief and fury. He tore through the remaining Rousseau line, his fire precise and devastating. Rousseau tried to scramble for cover, but Silas was faster, pinning the Don against a rusted crane. Alaric reached Elara, pulling her behind a stack of crates. He gripped her shoulders, his hands shaking with an adrenaline he hadn't felt in a decade. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine," she gasped, her eyes searching his face. "Did you get them? The books?" Alaric pulled a heavy, leather-bound volume from his tactical vest. It was stained with oil and blood, but it was intact. The history of the city's corruption was in his hands. "I have them," he rasped. "But you shouldn't be here. The risk." "The risk is over," she said, nodding toward the clearing smoke. The Rousseau forces were decimated. Anthony Rousseau was on his knees, surrounded by Valerius guns. The alliance that had tried to break the shadow had been shattered by the moon. Alaric walked toward Rousseau, the black book clutched in one hand and his gun in the other. He looked at the fallen Don, then at Elara. He saw the fire in her hazel eyes, the same fire that had allowed her to lead a tactical strike while carrying his child. "You wanted the black books, Anthony?" Alaric asked, his voice a low, terrifying vibration. "I'll give you a preview. Page 1 is your death warrant. Page 2 is the end of your family's name." "Alaric, wait," Elara said, stepping beside him. Alaric paused, his finger on the trigger. "He tried to take everything, Elara. He threatened our child." "Death is too clean for him," Elara said, her eyes fixed on Rousseau. "If we kill him, he becomes a martyr for the old guard. If we use the books, he becomes a pariah. We hand the evidence of his skimming to the commission. We hand the evidence of his federal informants to his own lieutenants. We let his world tear him apart." Alaric looked at her, a slow, dark smile spreading across his face. He leaned down and whispered into Rousseau's ear. "My wife is far more merciful than I am, Anthony, but her mercy is much, much slower." The return to the tower was a victory march through a city that now truly belonged to them. The black books were moved to a secure vault, not for blackmail, but for insurance. The names within were the keys to a life where no judge would ever sign a warrant against them again. As they reached the penthouse, the sun began to rise over the Atlantic, painting the skyline in hues of gold and violet. Alaric led Elara to the balcony. He was still covered in the dust of the war, but he looked lighter, as if a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from his soul. He knelt before her, his head resting against her stomach, his hands covering the ring on her finger. "It's done," he whispered. "The Rousseau family is in shambles. The Moretti line is erased. The commission has accepted our transition. We are legitimate, Elara. Truly, legally legitimate." "We are the Valerius legacy," she corrected, running her fingers through his dark hair. "I used to think the shadow was all I would ever be," Alaric said, looking up at her with eyes that were no longer smoke-grey but clear and bright. "But you taught me that the moon doesn't just watch the dark. It guides the way out of it." He stood up and pulled her into a kiss, a long, deep promise of a future that was finally theirs. "The final war is over, Mrs. Valerius," he murmured against her lips. "From now on, the only thing we fight for is each other." As the city woke up below them, the shadow and the moon stood together on the edge of a new world. The war was over, and the era of the light was finally beginning. The air in the hills of the Hudson Valley was crisp, smelling of cedar, wild lavender, and the coming autumn. It was a world away from the metallic tang of the Jersey docks and the suffocating smoke of the Little Italy social clubs. Here, the only shadows were those cast by the towering oaks, and the only families were the ones invited for Sunday brunch. 10 years had passed since the night of the final war. Elara stood on the terrace of the Valerius estate, a sprawling stone manor that combined the elegance of a French chateau with the ironclad security of a modern fortress. She wore a simple white linen dress, her hair loose and catching the golden afternoon light. On her finger, the gold band with the wolf and the crescent moon remained, no longer a shackle, but a symbol of a foundation that had held firm through every storm. "Mom, look what Dad found!" A young girl, barely 9 years old, came racing across the lawn. Her name was Sophie Valerius. She had Elara's hazel eyes and Alaric's sharp, determined jawline. She was holding a small, smooth riverstone as if it were a rare diamond. Following behind her was Alaric. He had aged like fine wine, the grey at his temples only adding to the aura of a man who had conquered the world and decided he liked his backyard better. He was dressed in a casual navy sweater, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattoos that were now the only remnants of his former life. The Shadow was a ghost story told by old men in prisons. To the world of philanthropy and global shipping, he was Alaric Valerius, the man who had revolutionized the maritime industry. "A riverstone," Elara said, kneeling to kiss her daughter's forehead. "It's beautiful, Sophie. It looks like it's been smoothed by 1,000 years of water." "Dad says it's like us," Sophie said with the serious tone she had inherited from her father. "He says that even the hardest edges can be made soft if they're held long enough." Elara looked up at Alaric. He caught her eye, a slow, tender smile spreading across his face, a look that was reserved only for the two people in the world who truly knew him. "Go show your Uncle Silas," Alaric said, ruffling Sophie's hair. "I think he's in the garden pretending not to watch the perimeter." Sophie giggled and ran off toward the tall, silent man standing near the rose bushes. Silas, now the head of the estate's security, had traded his tactical gear for a blazer, though the bulge under his jacket remained a quiet reminder of the price of their peace. Alaric walked up the steps and pulled Elara into his arms. He didn't say anything at first. He simply held her, his chin resting on the top of her head as they watched the sun begin its descent behind the mountains. "The Foundation's annual report came in today," Elara murmured, leaning into his strength. "The hospital in the Bronx has successfully treated 10,000 children this year. The vocational schools are at full capacity. The Valerius name is officially associated with hope in the city's archives." "It's a long way from the black books," Alaric replied, his voice a warm rumble. "Sometimes I still wake up expecting to hear the hum of the jammers or the sound of Luca's radio." "Luca is enjoying his retirement in Sicily too much to call," Elara teased. "He sent a crate of lemons last week. He says the air there is almost as clean as our ledgers." Alaric laughed, a genuine, deep sound that still made Elara's heart skip. He pulled back, his grey eyes searching hers. "Are you happy, Elara? Truly? Or do you miss the thrill of the war rooms?" Elara looked at her husband, the man who had started as her boss, became her captor, and ended as her soul. She thought about the ghost in the office, the girl from Queens who had been afraid of her own shadow. Then she looked at the woman she was now, the architect of a legacy, the mother of a future, and the equal partner to a king. "I don't miss the war," she said, reaching up to trace the thin white scar on his cheek, a relic of the Moretti attack. "But I don't regret a single second of it. It brought me to you. It taught me that the moon doesn't just reflect the light, it defines it." "The moon's reflection," Alaric whispered, leaning down to press his forehead against hers. "My heart, my life." He kissed her then, not a kiss of possession or of war, but a kiss of deep, abiding peace. It was the kiss of a man who was no longer a monster and a woman who was no longer a ghost. As the first stars began to peek through the violet sky, the shadow and the moon stood together on their terrace. Below them, their daughter's laughter echoed through the trees, a bright, clear sound that carried no weight of the past. The empire of blood had been dismantled. The kingdom of stone had been replaced by a home of light. The Valerius story had begun in the dark, but as the moon rose over the valley, reflecting the warmth of the sun that had just set, it was clear that the light would never fade again. The moon was full, and the shadow was finally at rest.